Picture a bedroom the size of a small church. Now fill it with approximately 40 pounds of fresh flowers changed every single morning. Add candles burning in every gilded sconce, wigs the size of small ships, and a woman whose undergarments were considered such a state secret that 12 ladies of the court had to be present just to watch her put them on. That's Versailles. The most beautiful building in Europe, and depending on where you are standing, one of the most unbearable places to work in the history of human civilization. A place where you could watch a ballet on a floating barge in the morning and smell a chamber pot emptied into a marble hallway by evening. A place where the windows were works of art and the corridors smelled like a public toilet that had given up. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists pressing your nose against velvet ropes and admiring the Hall of Mirrors from a respectful distance. We're living it. One day, one person, one. Everything she would have touched, smelled, survived, and quietly hated about the most glamorous address in the Western world. This is the morning after a party at Versailles in the summer of 1788. And by party, I mean a masked ball that began at 9 in the evening and ended sometime around 4 in the morning, involving approximately 800 guests, 40 musicians, enough food to feed a small army, and a level of perfume so concentrated it could stun a horse. The party is over, the guests have gone, the candles are guttering, the floor is sticky, and your workday has just begun. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I genuinely have no idea if anyone is actually sleeping to these, or if you're all just people who enjoy hearing about the hidden infrastructure of aristocratic filth. The unwashed, perfumed, staggeringly expensive infrastructure of filth. Either way, I support your choices. Subscribe if you feel moved to. Get comfortable. Pull your blanket up. Here we go. Your name is Céleste Renard. You're 17 years old, and you arrived at Versailles 8 months ago from Troyes, which is a city about 100 miles southeast of Paris that is famous for producing excellent textiles, and absolutely nothing that prepared you for this. You came with a letter of introduction from your father's employer, a minor nobleman who knew someone, and you were placed as a femme de chambre in the household of Her Majesty Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, wife of Louis XVI, daughter of the Austrian Empress, and the most discussed woman in Europe. You are one of approximately 250 people employed specifically to keep her alive, comfortable, dressed, fed, and entertained every single day of her life. You still haven't spoken to her directly. After 8 months, she has passed within arm's reach of you dozens of times. You have touched her sheets, her towels, her hairbrushes. You have gathered her discarded gloves from the floor. You have smoothed the indentation her body left in her mattress while she was in another room. And she has not once looked at you in a way that suggests she knows your name, your face, or that you exist at all. That is not a complaint. That is simply how this works. The door to the back passage opens at 4:30 in the morning, and you are already in it. The smell hits you the second you step inside. Not the smell you were expecting. Not the official smell of Versailles. The carefully maintained fiction of roses and cedarwood and expensive imported lavender that the place presents to the world. That smell is a performance, and performances end. What you smell now, moving through the narrow servants' corridor that runs parallel to the Queen's apartment, is the truth underneath the performance. It's layers. It's always layers in this place. First, candle smoke, hours and hours of it, soaked into the curtains, the carpet, the very plaster of the walls. Beeswax candles, the expensive kind, the kind they burn by the thousands in the staterooms, and they have a smell that is almost sweet when fresh and almost oily when old. And right now they are old. They are very old. They're the last hour of a long night, and the wicks are drowning in their own wax, and the smoke is thick enough to give you a headache if you stand in one place too long. Second, wine. Spilled, mostly. But also drunk, which means it's coming out through people's skin now. That particular warm, fermented smell that rises off a crowd that has been drinking for 7 hours. The staterooms are empty, but the smell hasn't left. It's settled into everything like a guest who refuses to acknowledge that the evening is over. Third, roses. There were 400 fresh roses arranged in the antechamber last night. And roses are beautiful when they're fresh and grotesque when they're dying. And at 4:30 in the morning these roses are dying. They are very much dying. And the smell of dying roses is nothing like the smell of living ones. It's heavier, sweeter in a way that goes past pleasant into something almost nauseating, like fruit that's a day past ripe, like something good that's become something else entirely. Fourth, underneath all of that, beneath the candles and the wine and the dying flowers, is the smell that nobody ever talks about. The smell that is the actual smell of Versailles, of any place where hundreds of human bodies live, work, eat, sweat, and dress themselves in layers of fabric and powder and animal fat cosmetics. It's the smell of people, specific, particular, impossible to mask entirely, no matter how many roses you cut or how much civet you dab onto hot skin. The smell of 800 people in their finest clothes, dancing, laughing, pressing against each other in overheated rooms for 7 hours, including the Queen, including you, underneath your working dress, though your sweat is the honest sweat of labour, and theirs is the complicated sweat of performance, which is somehow worse. Welcome to Versailles in the summer of 1788. You shift the bundle of fresh linens in your arms and keep moving down the corridor. The passage is narrow enough that 2 people can barely pass each other, and the ceiling is low, and there are no windows, and the only light comes from a single candle you're carrying in your left hand, the flame bending away from you as you walk. The floor is bare stone, swept but not polished. The walls are plain plaster. If you pressed your ear to the wall on your right, you would hear the echoing emptiness of the Queen's antechamber, which is now being silently dismantled by a crew of men who've been working since the last guest left. You don't press your ear to the wall. You know what's in there. You know every room in the Queen's apartment from the inside out now, from the hidden side, the working side that the court does not see or acknowledge. The beautiful rooms that tourists would weep over if tourists were allowed here, which they sometimes are. Certain days when the court opens the palace for public viewing, and the curious and the gawping pour in to press their faces at the furniture. Those rooms you know from behind and below. You know where the carpets are thin because they're walked on constantly. You know which drawer sticks in the marquetry commode and needs a specific angle of pressure to open. You know that the famously magnificent gilded mirror in the first antechamber has a crack along its lower left corner that has been strategically obscured by a slightly repositioned candelabra for at least 3 years. You know Versailles the way you know a person you've been dressing every morning, intimately, practically, and with a knowledge that has very little to do with admiration. There is a door at the end of the passage. You take the handle, which is cold. Everything is cold at this hour. The palace doesn't warm up properly until mid-morning. And you open it into the second antechamber. Your supervisor is already there. Madame Vernet. She is standing with her back to you when you enter. examining a piece of fabric under a candle with the concentration of a surgeon. She's 53 years old, and she has been in service at Versailles for 29 of those years. She came here as a girl of 24, which means she's outlasted 3 monarchs, 2 queens, 1 attempted coup, and approximately 11 different fashions in hair decoration. She's a small woman with grey hair pulled back so severely it gives her forehead a slightly startled look, and she has hands that are always moving, always checking, always straightening something that doesn't need straightening. Her eyes are brown and quick, and they land on you the moment you come through the door. "You're 30 seconds late," she says. "You're not late. You know you're not late. You've been timing yourself for 8 months. But you've also learned not to say this. Forgive me, madame." She turns back to the fabric she was examining. "The roses from the antechamber are being taken down. I want you in the bedchamber first. The windows need opening before she rings. The fire needs checking." "Yes, madame." Gently with the windows. She doesn't like a draught. "Yes, madame." "And the basin on the near side. Empty it before she comes through." She doesn't look at you again. She doesn't need to. The conversation is over. You cross the antechamber, moving quickly, moving quietly, the way you've been taught to move in every room you enter here. Quickly and quietly, make yourself useful but not visible. Be present but not perceived. Do the work, but do not let the work be seen being done. There is a skill to this. You've been developing it for 8 months. You're not bad at it. The double doors to the bedchamber are slightly ajar, and you push through them with your shoulder because your arms are full of linen. The room opens around you like a held breath. It is, objectively, one of the most beautiful rooms in the world. You know this the way you know anything about your own life, without particularly feeling it anymore, just as a fact. The ceiling is painted with clouds and allegorical figures, the kind of clouds that only exist in paintings, perfect and gold-edged. The walls are silk, pale blue and gold, and the fireplace is marble veined with grey, and the mantelpiece is crowded with small gilded clocks and porcelain figures, each one worth more than your family's house and everything in it. And in the centre of the room, behind its elaborate frame of gilded wood and embroidered curtains, the bed, the Queen's bed. It is already empty. She hasn't slept in it tonight. After the ball, after the ritual of undressing and the ritual of the evening toilette and the ritual good night from the ladies of the court, she apparently retired to her private cabinet rather than her state bedroom, which happens sometimes, which means the state bed has the particular look of an elaborate prop that was prepared and then not used. The covers are turned back at a perfect angle. The pillows are arranged just so. On the night table, a small silver pitcher of water sits untouched. The water slightly warm now, slightly flat, the surface of it reflecting the candle you're carrying. This bed will not be slept in, but it will be made. That's the rule. The state bedroom is prepared every night, regardless. Every morning, whether she slept here or not, the bed is freshened and the sheets are changed if they've been occupied, and the pillows are beaten, and the counterpane is checked for any mark or imperfection. Today the sheets haven't been slept on, but they will still be changed. That's your job for the next 40 minutes. You set the linens down on the chest at the foot of the bed, careful not to let them touch the floor, and you go to the nearest window first. The smell in here is different from the corridor, less honest in some ways, more complicated. The smell of the bedchamber, on the morning after a long night at Versailles, is something that no one in the perfume industry would ever try to bottle and sell. But it's real. It's specific. and if you had to break it down, the way a perfumer breaks down a composition looking for its individual notes, you would find something like this. Musk. That's the base note. Always. Musk was the foundation of almost every perfume used in this era, and the Queen wore perfume the way other people wear skin, which is to say constantly and generously and as an extension of identity. Her specific perfume was made by Jean-Louis Farjeon, her personal parfumeur, who came to the palace regularly to adjust the formula based on the season and her changing preferences. The particular combination he'd developed for her had rose and iris, and something animal underneath, something deep and warm and almost bodily, which is what musk is, because musk in this period is not a synthetic recreation. It comes from a gland near the abdomen of a small deer-like creature in Central Asia, and you don't really need to think too hard about that. But once you know it, you can't unknow it, and the smell of the bedchamber at 4 a.m. has that quality in abundance. Warm, organic. The ghost of a woman's presence made chemical. That's the base. On top of that there's powder. Fine, white powder. The kind that was applied to wigs and to skin, made from starch or occasionally from flour, occasionally perfumed itself, and it has settled everywhere. On the surface of the dressing table, on the seat of the chair before it, suspended in the air in microscopic particles that you'll still be breathing out tomorrow. The smell of powder is almost neutral, almost like nothing, but it coats everything else, softens it, rounds the edges. Without the powder, the room would smell more like a person, and less like an abstraction. Then there's the flower water. Lavender water mostly, used for the final rinse on everything that touches skin. The sheets, the towels, the chemises that get changed multiple times a day. Lavender has been soaked into this fabric so thoroughly over so many years that the smell comes off when you handle it, comes off on your hands, and for a while when you first arrived here you smelled faintly of lavender all the time, even after washing, and it was pleasant, and then it became unremarkable, and now it's simply part of the air you breathe in this part of the palace. And underneath all of that, underneath the musk and the powder and the lavender, there's something else. Something you weren't expecting when you first arrived. Something that took you a while to identify. The smell of the chamber pot. It's been emptied. Of course it has been emptied. Emptying chamber pots is one of the more precisely choreographed rituals in the entire complicated liturgy of the royal morning, and there are rules about when and how and by whom, and none of those rules involve leaving the contents to sit and broadcast their presence at 4:30 a.m. But emptied doesn't mean gone. The porcelain has been rinsed and replaced, and the smell that lingers is faint, is genuinely faint, is probably only detectable by someone who knows to look for it. But you know to look for it, and it's there. The raw, organic human fact of it, present under all the musk and powder like a word in a letter that's been crossed out but not crossed out quite thoroughly enough. She is a human being. She has a body. The body does what bodies do. And every morning it is your job to make that fact disappear. You open the window first, the one on the left, because it opens more easily, and the early morning air comes in. It's summer, so it's not cold, but it's fresh in the way that only air at this hour is fresh, still cool from the night, before the heat of the day and the heat of thousands of bodies moving through these corridors bakes it into something thick and complex and much less pleasant. You let it in. Just a few inches, not too much. She doesn't like a draft, but enough to start moving the air in the room, to start replacing what's been sitting here all night with something newer. The birds in the gardens are already singing. That's the first honest sound of the morning. Before the bells, before the footsteps in the corridors, before the machinery of the court starts grinding into motion, there are just birds. They don't know what this building is. They don't know about the etiquette that governs who is allowed to carry a candle and who has to walk in the dark. They just sing in the pale pre-dawn over the petty park, and the sound comes through the 2 inches of open window and sits in the room alongside the musk and the powder and the lingering ghost of the chamber pot, and it's almost peaceful. Almost. You have approximately 35 minutes before the first bell, and there's nothing peaceful about 35 minutes when there's this much to do. You strip the state bed. The sheets come off in one practiced movement, caught before they fall, folded into a bundle. They haven't been slept on, but they've been lying here since 7 o'clock last evening, when the room was prepared for the night, and the air of a room where a ball has been held filters under doors and through curtains and leaves its mark even on unused fabric. The sheets go into the linen basket near the door. New ones go on. The new sheets are cool under your hands, ironed to a smoothness that has no wrinkles, no creases, ironed with heavy flat irons heated on a fire somewhere in the bowels of this building, carried up here by a woman you've never met whose entire job is the ironing, who has been doing the ironing since before you were born. The linen smells of the iron, that particular clean hot metal smell, and of the lavender water used in the final press, and when you spread it out over the mattress and smooth it flat with the flat of your hand, the fabric whispers against the mattress cover with a sound like a very soft breath. You work fast. Tuck the corners, military precision because Madame Vernet will check. Pull the counterpane up, smooth it from the centre outward. Beat the pillows, a sharp practiced knock that makes the feathers redistribute, then set them back, then adjust the angle of the turn down. Check, check, check. Your hands know this sequence the way your lungs know how to breathe. The basin on the near side of the bed, the one Madame mentioned, has a small amount of water in it. Water that was left from last night's ritual, and you carry it to the slop pail near the door, moving carefully because the last thing you need at this hour is to slosh lavender water onto your dress, and you set the empty basin back and replace it with the filled one from the dressing table, where it's been sitting under a cloth. The fireplace is almost out. It's summer, so it was never intended to be blazing, but there are rules about the Queen's fire, and the rules say it must be maintained at a specific level of readiness, and right now it's in the grey ash stage that suggests it might relight if encouraged and might not if it isn't. You pick up the small tongs from the stand, adjust the remaining coals, a small breath on the embers, controlled, not too much, and a new coal from the scuttle, and the fire coughs back into something that could reasonably be described as present. Good. You step back, survey the room, bed made, basin fresh, window cracked, fire alive. Roses. You look at the roses in the vase on the mantelpiece, and they're not the roses from the antechamber, those have been taken away. But these, the ones in the bedroom, are from yesterday's morning arrangement, and they are past their best. By the time the Queen actually enters this room, fresh ones will have been brought. But for now these are the ones in the room, and they are at that stage of a late bloom where the petals have relaxed into a softness that is either beautiful or beginning to be sad depending on how you look at it. And the smell they give off now is different from yesterday morning's smell. Richer, heavier, the sugary, deep smell of rose petals releasing everything they have left before the end. You find, surprisingly, that you like them better this way. You don't have time to think about that. The small clock on the mantelpiece, the one with the golden putty and the enamel face, reads 5:15. In 45 minutes, the lever begins. The lever. the word means rising in French, and it refers to the formal ritual of the Queen waking up and being dressed and prepared for the day, which is not a private act but a public one, conducted in the presence of anywhere from 12 to 40 people, depending on the day and the occasion and who has shown up to have the honour of watching. The lever has been a feature of French royal life for over 100 years. Louis XIV established most of the ceremonial rules. The idea is that the monarch's body is public property, or at least public spectacle, and that the act of the monarch rising from sleep and assuming the costume of royalty is a kind of daily theatrical statement about the nature of power. What it means in practice is that the Queen cannot put on her own clothes in the morning. She can't just pick up her chemise and put it on. There are rules. There's a hierarchy governing every item of clothing, every article that touches her skin, and which hands are permitted to pass it to her, and in what order, and what happens when the wrong person reaches for something first. These rules are absolute. They have the weight of tradition and the force of law and the social power of 30 years of court precedent behind them, and they create on a daily basis situations that are absurd. You will see this shortly, you always do. But first there's the rest of the room to manage, and there's Madame Vernet, who has come through the door with the look she gets when she's found something wrong somewhere. "The left pillow," she says. You look at the left pillow. It looks correct to you. "The angle," she says. You adjust the angle of the left pillow by approximately 3 degrees. Madame Vernet examines it, nods once, moves to the fireplace, bends over the coals, makes a small adjustment with the tongs that seems identical to the adjustment you already made. "The roses will be changed before she comes in," she says. "Of course." "Florentine arrangement this morning," she asks specifically. "I can carry them up from the—" "Gilles is already doing it." She straightens up. "Your job this morning is the dressing table. Arrange it and then stand back. She's already been told the court is thin today. Tuesday morning after a ball. Half of them are still in bed." She says this last thing with the flatness of someone who has no patience for people who are still in bed at 5 in the morning. Madame Vernet has been rising at 4 in the morning for 29 years. The idea of sleeping late strikes her the way a moral failing would. "After the lever, I need you in the linen room. There's an inventory." "Yes, madame." She pauses. She's looking at the window, at the crack you've left. "Good," she says. It takes you a moment to realize she's talking about the window, about the judgment call you made. She doesn't say anything else. She goes out through the far door, the one that leads to the private cabinet corridor, and you hear her quiet footsteps recede into the palace. You stand alone in the Queen's bedroom, just you and the dying roses and the new sheets and the small fire and the birds outside and the smell of it, all of it. The complicated truth of this room that no one is supposed to notice or acknowledge or name. You go to the dressing table. The dressing table is a piece of furniture that you have come to think of as your personal adversary. Not because it's difficult to arrange, but because of what the arrangement represents. This table, which is a masterpiece of cabinetry, which has a top of inlaid fruitwood and a surface of polished marble, and a mirror framed in gilded bronze that cost more than your father earns in 3 years. This table is where the Queen sits every morning and becomes the Queen, in the sense that she takes the raw material of a woman who has been asleep and transforms it, with the assistance of 8 to 12 people and approximately 40 separate items, into the recognizable public figure who will be looked at for the rest of the day. The items on this table are arrayed according to a specific order. You learned the order in your first week. By now you can reproduce it with your eyes closed, which you have in fact done once, as a kind of private test. From left to right along the back, 3 stoppered glass bottles of different sizes, the largest containing toilet water, the middle one containing rose water, the smallest containing something more expensive that you've been instructed to handle, only with clean, dry hands. Then a small silver-topped jar of cold cream, which serves as the base layer before the powder. Then a flat box of white powder, the kind used on the face, made from bismuth and rice flour, and something that gives it a faint violet undertone that is supposedly flattering to pale skin. Then a smaller box of rose-tinted powder that gets applied to the cheekbones. Then a glass rod for mixing pigments, used if any colour mixing's required. Then 3 small pots, each stoppered, containing different intensities of carmine for the lips and cheeks. You check each item. Opened, verified, replaced. The bottles are full. Someone prepared them last night, or very early this morning. This is not your job in the hierarchy. You're not the first femme de chambre, which is the person who actually has contact with the Queen's body during the morning ritual. Your role is secondary and tertiary. You prepare surfaces, you hand things, you manage the logistics of the room so that the people who actually have the sacred honour of touching the royal person can do so without having to look around for the pot they need. You are, in the architecture of the Queen's morning, infrastructure. This is not meant as a diminishment. Madame Vernet, who is infrastructure herself, at a higher level of the infrastructure, would not consider this a diminishment. The palace runs on infrastructure. The entire spectacular, gilded performance of royalty runs on a hidden machinery of people who have prepared and arranged and fetched and carried, so that when the moment of performance arrives, everything is simply there, simply right, simply ready, as if by magic. Magic, you've learned, is labour that no one acknowledges. Behind the 3 stoppered bottles, behind the powder boxes and the carmine pots, there's a collection of things that are harder to categorise. A small leather case containing the needles and thread for emergency repairs to anything that might develop a problem during dressing. A pair of small scissors with enamelled handles. A miniature portrait in an oval frame. One of the Queen's children, though you've never been close enough to see which one. And a small handkerchief embroidered at the edges with roses that sits folded in a particular way that you've been instructed to recreate exactly if it's ever disturbed. You've never disturbed it, but you've looked at it. The handkerchief is interesting because it doesn't have the official look of the embroidered things in this room, the ones produced by the royal embroiderers and their small armies of assistants. The stitching is a little uneven. The roses are charming but not perfect. Someone who was not a professional made this handkerchief for her. Someone who cared more about the giving than the quality of the product. You don't know who. You've never asked. You set it back exactly as it was. The candles on the dressing table need replacing. Last night's stubs are still in their holders, burned down to nubs, and you take them out one by one and replace them with fresh ones from the small box in the second drawer. The holders need wiping first. They've accumulated a rim of wax at the base, and you use the corner of a cloth that lives in that drawer specifically for this purpose, and you wipe each holder clean, and the wax comes away on the cloth in thin curls that smell sharp and hot, even though the candles have been out for hours. The smell of cold candle wax, specific and strange, like something that's alive and isn't anymore. Fresh candles in, straight, level with each other. You look at the table one more time. Good. The clock on the mantelpiece, the one with the golden putti, reads 5:10. In the corridor outside you can hear movement now, other people arriving. The day beginning its specific ceremonious unfolding. The first bells ring at 5:30. The Queen's bell, which is different from the general palace bells and is struck by a specific mechanism in the first antechamber, rings once at that signal, and that ringing travels through the walls of this apartment, thin and clear, and you feel it in your chest before you hear it with your ears. And then there are footsteps, many footsteps. The first antechamber begins to fill. The lever is starting. You have a specific position during the lever, and it is not a glamorous position. You stand to the left of the dressing table, close enough to reach the second drawer if something is needed from it, far enough from the chair not to crowd the ladies who are doing the actual dressing. You are the nearest person to the door that leads to the water closet, so that if anything is needed from that direction, you are the one who goes. And you hold things. That is, periodically you're handed an item that someone is finished with and needs to be placed somewhere. And you place it somewhere, and then you wait until you're handed the next thing. You've been handed portions of a Queen's morning over and over for 8 months. The women file in. They have a hierarchy so specific and so deeply felt that even the order in which they take their positions in the room is governed by precedent. The Duchesse de Polignac, the Queen's closest friend, who serves as governess of the children of France, would have the right to be here if she chose. She does not always choose. This morning the court is thin, as Madame Vernet said. Tuesday morning after a ball, and some of the great ladies have pleaded their own exhaustion and sent substitutes. The substitutes are other women of rank slightly lower, who have earned or been assigned the honour of serving, and they come in their morning robes, their hair half dressed, their faces still carrying the particular pallor of people who went to bed at 4 and rose again at 5, because court etiquette does not care about your feelings. They don't look at you. None of them look at you. You are the furniture, the useful, functioning furniture of this room, but furniture nonetheless. The Countess who is serving as First Lady today has a face that says clearly she would prefer to still be in bed. Her eyes are slightly red. There's a faint trace of the previous night's rouge in the crease beside her mouth that her own maid missed when removing it. She takes her position beside the dressing table with the bearing of someone who has trained herself, over decades, never to show weakness in public, not even at 5:30 in the morning when weakness is entirely understandable. And she nods to the woman beside her, and they wait. The door to the private cabinet opens. The Queen comes in. She is 32 years old. She's been Queen of France since she was 18. She has 4 children, of whom 2 are living and 2 are dead, and the weight of those losses is not visible on her face right now, because she is very practiced at not being visible on her face. She's dressed in a morning robe, pale silk, tied loosely. Her hair is down, which you've seen before, but which always strikes you slightly, because the official version of her hair, the extraordinary elaborate architecture of powdered curls and ornaments and feathers that she presents to the world, is so familiar from paintings and engravings that seeing the hair itself, brown blonde and simply falling past her shoulders, still feels like catching something you weren't supposed to see. She looks tired. She went to bed at 4. She rose at 5. She sits at the dressing table without looking at the mirror first, which you've noticed she rarely does. The mirror exists for other people as much as for her, for the ladies standing around it, watching the transformation, able to say that they were there when the Queen put on her face. The ladies move into their positions, and now the ceremony begins in earnest. It begins with the face. Cold cream first, applied with small upward strokes by the First Lady, who has done this enough times that her hands move with the particular confidence of absolute practice. The cream is white and slightly thick, smells of rose water and something faintly waxy, and you can smell it from where you're standing, that soft, faintly floral smell rising in the warmth of the room. Then the powder. This is the part that fills the air. The powder is applied with a large soft brush, and the application involves a quantity of powder that, when dispersed into the air of a closed room, becomes its own weather event. A fine white cloud lifts off the surface of the Queen's face and drifts. It drifts toward you. It drifts toward the ladies. It settles on the shoulders of dark dresses and in the creases of folded fabric, and in the air you breathe. By the time the lever is over, everyone in this room will have a faint coating of white powder on them. This is one of those things no one mentions. The ladies who serve the Queen's mourning leave it smelling faintly of her perfume and breathing her powder. They carry her with them out into the corridors and the salons and the formal gardens, a little chemical ghost on their shoulders. You breathe in, breathe out. The powder is light in your lungs. While this is happening, there's a small incident. The second lady, a young woman, newer to the court than you are, which is saying something, reaches for the rose carmine pot before the first lady has finished with the powder brush. She means well. She's seen this sequence before. She's trying to be helpful by having the next item ready. But there is a rule about the sequence of items and who passes what, and in reaching for the carmine pot at this moment she has cut across an invisible but deeply meaningful line of precedent. The first lady says nothing. She simply moves the carmine pot a half-inch to the left, away from the second lady's reaching hand, and continues with the powder brush. The second lady's hand hovers for a moment, then withdraws. Her face goes very still. The Queen doesn't appear to have noticed. She's looking at something past the mirror, somewhere in the middle distance, the way she sometimes does, like she's watching something happening in a different room in her head. The sequence continues. The rose powder on the cheekbones, the carmine on the lips, each item passed in order, each motion precise. The ladies perform their roles with the expertise of people who have done this so many times that their bodies know where to be without being told. You watch the second lady's face for the rest of the lever. She doesn't let it show, but she knows what happened. She knows she made a mistake, and she knows that everyone in the room knows, and she knows that in the invisible ledger of court favour and court social standing, this small misstep has been noted and will remain noted for weeks or months or possibly forever, depending on who witnessed it and what kind of memory they carry. In this world, the smallest things are never small. The hair comes next. The coiffeur is summoned. He's been waiting in the anteroom, a slight young man with powder-stained hands and the slightly harried look of someone whose artistic vision is perpetually at odds with the practical constraints of time, and he brings his tools and his boxes and his own particular cloud of powder and begins the construction of the day's arrangement. You're handed at this point the embroidered handkerchief from the dressing table. It has been lifted during the arrangement of the powder boxes, and you're handed it and you hold it. You hold it for 20 minutes. The handkerchief is soft. The embroidery presses into your palm, the slight raised texture of the stitching, the imperfect roses, the small thread someone put into this piece of fabric from whatever distance, whatever life, whatever moment of affection. You try not to think about who made it. The lever ends. The ladies begin to disperse. The coiffeur packs his tools. The room is already being quietly reorganized around the Queen's departure into the day, her progress toward the first formal engagement of the morning, which is Mass, which happens every day. which she will attend in the Chapel Royal with a group of courtiers arranged in order of rank, which will be watched by a gallery of tourists and the curious who have been admitted to the palace for the day. You replace the handkerchief on the dressing table, exactly where it was, exactly the same fold. The second lady catches your eye as she passes. For a moment, just a second, she looks at you. Not through you, not past you, but at you. Her expression says something complicated that doesn't have a name. Not quite humiliation, not quite anger. More like the look of someone who has just understood something about their situation that they hadn't fully processed before. The look of someone counting. Then she looks away and goes out. You start clearing the dressing table. The residue of the morning toilette is remarkable in its specificity. The powder has settled everywhere in a fine white layer, thicker near the table and fading as you move away from it. A few rose-petal-shaped drops of carmine on the marble top, already drying to the dark rust colour that carmine becomes when it oxidizes. A small amount of cold cream on the edge of the brush that needs to be cleaned before it dries into the bristles. The candle holders have new drips already, fresh wax, white and slightly waxy smelling. You clean as you go. Cloth for the powder. Careful strokes so as not to scatter it further. A separate cloth for the carmine spots. The brush goes into the small basin of cleaning solution that lives in the bottom drawer, the one Madame Vernet showed you how to make in your first week. Water and a small amount of white wine vinegar, and you let it soak while you deal with the rest. By the time you finish the dressing table, the room has returned to something approaching its official face. The bed in the centre, made with military precision. The fire alive. The flowers. New ones have appeared. The Florentine arrangement Madame Vernet mentioned, white and pale yellow, in the vase on the mantelpiece, and you don't know when they were brought in because you didn't see it happen, which means someone moved through this room while you were standing at the lever and you didn't notice them, which is both impressive and mildly unsettling. The flowers fresh, the smell of them now competing with the remnant perfume and winning marginally for the moment. The room smells now mostly of flowers and powder, and the faint sharp undertone of cold cream. The musk has softened. The wine and candle smoke are being pushed out by the fresh air from the window. It almost smells like what it pretends to be. You close the window to exactly the position it was in when you arrived, gather the linens for the laundry and go to find Madame Vernet. She's in the linen room at the end of the service corridor, which is a room the size of a large closet that contains more fabric than you have ever seen in one place outside of a merchant's warehouse. Shelves from floor to ceiling, each shelf stacked with folded linens in precise piles, sheets, pillowcases, towels, chemises, handkerchiefs, nightgowns, all of it organised by type and by degree of use, the freshest on the right and the used but not yet laundered on the left, waiting for the collection that happens at 10 every morning. Madame Vernet has a ledger open on the small table in the centre and is running her finger down a column of numbers. "Close the door," she says without looking up. You close the door. The linen room smells of its contents. That layered smell of fabric and lavender water and the cold metal smell of the iron. It's one of the better smelling places in the palace, honestly, because it's a working room and the people who work in it are concerned with actual cleanliness, not the performance of it. You add your linens to the left shelf, noting the count in the secondary ledger as you've been taught. 3 sheet sets, 2 pillow sets, 1 dressing table cloth. You write it in the column. The number is absorbed into the larger accounting of fabric that flows through this room every day. the enormous, invisible river of textile that moves from bed to body to laundry and back again, every single day, regardless of what else is happening in the world. The count from yesterday is wrong, Madame Vernet says. She's still looking at her ledger. Her finger has stopped on a line. Which category? Towels. There are 4 fewer than there should be. The handwork room says they sent 14 up in the last collection. We have 10. You know what this means. This is not the first time it's happened. Shall I ask in the second antechamber? You shall ask everywhere. She closes the ledger with a snap that means she's done being conversational. We will not have missing linens, not in this household. If there are missing linens, there is a reason, and the reason will be found. The reason, in your experience, is usually one of 3 things: a miscounted delivery, a linen that's been repurposed temporarily for something without proper notation, or, less often but not never, something that has walked away in someone's apron pocket. Linens have value. Linen from the royal household has particular value if you can get it out of the palace, which most people cannot, but some people try. And the trying is always eventually noticed, because people like Madame Vernet run ledgers with the devotion of a priest running a confessional, and they know where everything is and they will find out where it went. The consequence for stealing linen from the Queen's household is dismissal. Immediate dismissal, without a reference letter, which in practice is the end of your career in service, which in practice is a catastrophe when service is the only skill you have. You go to ask about the towels. The corridors of Versailles are different at 6:30 in the morning than they are at any other time of day. The public rooms won't open for another 2 hours. The formal business of the court hasn't begun. But the service life of the palace, the hidden life, the below-stairs life that keeps everything running, is already in full operation, and the narrow corridors that run behind the staterooms are busy with the specific purposeful bustle of people who have tasks and know them. You pass a man carrying a bucket of coal up from the lower levels, his arms streaked with black dust, his boots leaving dark prints on the stone floor, his breath coming short with the effort of the weight. He doesn't look at you. You don't look at him. This is the tacit agreement that makes movement possible when the corridors are this narrow and this busy. You establish purpose by your pace and direction, and you trust that everyone else will do the same, and you navigate around each other like ships passing in known waters. You pass 2 women from the laundry, carrying between them a basket of folded sheets, moving in the deliberate way of people carrying something heavy that must not be dropped. The sheets smell of the iron and of lavender, and you feel the warmth radiating from them as they pass. Just done, recently pressed, heat still held in the fabric. You pass a man in livery, a footman, one of the ones stationed in the antechambers, who is moving quickly toward the main apartments with the slightly harried look of someone who has been called somewhere and is not quite sure if they're on time. He has a small parcel under his arm wrapped in cloth, something someone needs somewhere. He passes without acknowledgement. The corridors have their own smell, distinct from the rooms they serve. Stone and cold air and the specific smell of many people moving through a space repeatedly over many years. Something almost mineral, almost like the smell of a cave, under the more immediate smells of coal dust and soap and the food that gets carried through from the kitchens. There's a faint smell of drains somewhere. The drainage at Versailles is not, shall we say, its greatest achievement. The palace was built for spectacle, not for plumbing, and the discrepancy between the two has been generating a particular smell in the lower corridors and certain ground floor passages for as long as anyone can remember. You have asked, in your 8 months here, exactly 4 people about the drains at Versailles. The first person laughed. The second person changed the subject. The third person gave you a look that suggested the question itself was somehow inappropriate. The fourth person, a woman who has been doing laundry here for 15 years, told you flatly that the drains have always been bad and always will be. And if you can't tolerate that, you should find work somewhere with better plumbing, by which she meant anywhere else in France. And then she went back to her work. The drains are the smell of Versailles without the powder. The bass note before the performance starts. You make your way to the second antechamber, which is managed by a different person, a Monsieur Renaud, who is the chief attendant for the room and who keeps his own records and who is, in Madame Vernet's phrase, not always as careful as one would like. Monsieur Renaud is in the process of directing 2 young men in the replacement of some candles in the large chandelier, which involves a ladder and a great deal of tallow and the specific smell of melting wax that fills the room when you open the door. Towels, you say, when he acknowledges you. 4 missing from yesterday's count. Madame Vernet would like to know where they are. He turns from the chandelier project with the expression of a man who has been presented with a problem at an inconvenient time, which is, from his perspective, any time. I sent exactly what was counted, he says. The count shows 4 short. Then the count is wrong. This is the standard first response. You wait. He looks at you for a moment, decides that Madame Vernet is more trouble than the argument is worth, and turns to a cabinet near the door. He opens it. Inside, on the top shelf, folded but slightly less precisely than Madame Vernet would accept, are 4 towels. Here, he says. Why are they? One of the ladies asked for them last night for removing her makeup. I meant to note it. I'll send them over. You take them. You write the note that explains where they were, because Madame Vernet will want the note. And you start back toward the linen room. The 4 towels in your arms are slightly crumpled, but otherwise fine. One of them has a trace of carmine on the corner, the dark dried rust colour. And you think briefly, with no particular feeling about it, about the face that pressed against this cloth last night, removing itself from itself, becoming a different person in the privacy of a borrowed room. Everyone here is always in the process of becoming a different person. The Queen becomes the Queen every morning with 40 items and 12 women. The ladies become their public selves with powder and rouge and the disciplined expression they've been cultivating since childhood. The servants become invisible, which is its own kind of performance. You wonder sometimes, not often, but sometimes, who you are when no one is watching. You don't have a very good answer yet. Back in the linen room, you hand the towels to Madame Vernet, who examines them with the thoroughness of someone who has learned that trust without verification is simply optimism. Notes the carmine on the corner towel with a small compress of her lips, and adds them to the correct pile. After inventory, I want you in the kitchen corridor, she says. The flowers from last night haven't all been collected. There are still arrangements in the 3rd corridor that need to go to the composting pile. Yes, madame. And then the afternoon preparations. We have a formal reception at 4. Today? She gives you a look that says she does not consider the question worth answering. Because yes, today there is always something today. There is something every day. And the rhythm of this palace is relentless and does not care what happened last night or how few hours you slept or whether your feet ache from standing on stone floors since before the sun rose. 4 o'clock, she says. The furniture in the grand salon needs to be reviewed by noon. I want your eyes on the dressing table at 3. She closes her ledger. The conversation is over. You go to collect dead flowers. The third corridor runs along the garden side of the palace, and the windows here, unlike the narrow service passages, are large and face east, and this early in the morning the light comes through them at a low angle that hits the stone floor and the walls, and the fading flower arrangements in what you would almost call a beautiful way, if you had time to think about beautiful. The flowers from last night's event have been partially collected, but partially is not completely, and the ones remaining are at various stages of decline. Most of them are roses. There were always roses at Versailles events, an embarrassing quantity of roses, because roses were fashionable and expensive, and their abundance was a statement about the resources of the court. The roses that are still here in the third corridor are in large silver urns, the kind normally used in the state rooms, and they have been here since yesterday afternoon, when they were arranged for the arrival of the evening's guests, and they have now been here through a long hot summer night, and they are at the stage that roses reach when they've been cut and then ignored. The outer petals have begun to fall, lying on the stone floor around the bases of the urns like small pink and red patches, and the centres of the blooms have loosened, opened too wide, and the smell is extraordinary. Not bad exactly, not the smell of decomposition, not yet, but an extremity of rose smell, as if the flowers have been pushed past the point of refinement into something rawer, something that is almost more rose than roses are when they're fresh and perfect, and arranged by a professional. You bend to pick up a fallen petal. It's soft in a way that fresh petals aren't, a little translucent, slightly damp with its own moisture. The colour is still deep pink. You hold it for a moment, then you put it in the collecting basket with the others. The work of clearing the corridor takes about 20 minutes. You carry the urns to a staging area near the garden door, where they'll be taken by the garden staff to the composting area. The stone floor you sweep of petals with the small brush, working quickly, the bristles scraping against the stone with a sound like soft breath. From the window, the gardens of Versailles are already in their morning business. The gardens of Versailles are their own world, as elaborate and choreographed as the interior of the palace, though governed by a different kind of hierarchy. There are teams of gardeners, hundreds of them, over the whole of the palace grounds, and they arrive before dawn, and they work until after dark, and the nature of their work is the imposition of a specific idea of order onto natural things that have other ideas. The topiary is cut to geometric shapes. The flower beds are organized by color and species with a precision that no meadow ever achieved. The fountains are managed according to schedules that account for the water pressure required to make them perform at their best during peak court hours. Right now, from the window, you can see 3 gardeners at the far end of the parterre, moving along a row of hedges with long-handled shears. They are small in the distance, precise, regular in their movements, and they remind you slightly of the ladies at the lever this morning. The same sense of trained bodies performing trained motions, fitting themselves to the requirements of the setting. The sky above them is fully light now. The sun has cleared the horizon. The day has begun. Your feet are already aching. You've been on stone floors since 4:30, and your shoes, which are serviceable but not designed for the specific punishment of palace floors, are expressing their opinion about this. You ignore them. You've gotten good at ignoring your feet. There are still 4 more urns to carry. By the time you finish the corridor, it's 7:15. The palace around you is warming up now in both senses, the temperature rising as the sun hits the stone walls, and the activity level rising as more and more people arrive for the morning's business. You can hear from the direction of the state apartments the sound of many conversations beginning. Courtiers arriving for the morning's activities, ladies greeting each other in the specific half-whisper that is the appropriate register for conversation in the palace's public rooms. There's a woman sitting on a bench at the end of the corridor who was not there when you started. She's one of the court ladies, dressed already for the morning in a blue silk robe and a cap, and she has an embroidery frame in her lap, and she's working at it with the focus of someone who has arranged themselves in a pleasant spot with good light, and has no intention of moving anytime soon. Her needle goes in and out. The silk on the frame is pale yellow. She doesn't look up as you carry the last urn past her. You've thought about this kind of moment a lot. The woman with the embroidery frame and you with the urn. The same corridor, the same morning. Two completely different experiences of this place. She lives here in the way that birds live in trees. It's her environment. She navigates it by its own rules, by the rules of rank and precedent and the intricate language of court favour that governs everything from where you stand at Mass to who speaks to you first at a reception. She's spent years learning those rules. They're her intelligence, her skill, her tool for surviving and thriving in this environment. You live here in the way that a fish lives in water, sustaining the medium that makes the environment possible. Invisible because invisibility is the condition of your usefulness. Neither of you is wrong about this place. You're just seeing different things. The urn is heavy. Your arms are feeling it. You shift the weight and keep going. The morning meal for servants happens in the lower ground floor, in a long room with stone walls and plain wooden tables, and it happens in rotation because there are too many servants to eat at once, and because the work of the palace doesn't stop for meals, it just reorganises itself around them. You eat in the second rotation, which starts at 7:30. You have, this morning, a bowl of soup. The soup is vegetable soup, made from the carcasses of yesterday's chicken and whatever root vegetables the kitchen had available. And it is, you're always slightly surprised by this, actually good. The kitchen staff at Versailles are excellent. They are some of the best fed servants in France, because the quality of the raw materials flowing through this kitchen is extraordinary, and because even the scraps and the surplus, even what filters down to the servants' table, has been prepared by people who know what they're doing, you eat quickly. The bowl is ceramic, plain white, thick-walled, and when you pick it up, the warmth of it goes through your hands and up your arms, and you feel it in your shoulders, which have been cold since 4 this morning, and for a moment, just a moment, everything stops being about the next task. There's bread too. Yesterday's bread, slightly hard, good for dipping. You dip. The room around you fills and empties in its rotation. The woman next to you is from the laundry, you think. You don't know her name, but you recognise her hands, the particular redness of them from the hot water and lye soap of the laundry work, the way she holds things slightly apart from herself, as if they might be hotter than they are. Across from you, one of the younger footmen is eating with the speed of someone who has learned never to waste a moment. He's perhaps 14. He has a spot of candle wax on his collar that he either hasn't noticed or has decided to address later. No one talks much at this meal. The people around you are conserving energy for the day. You think about the 4 missing towels and the carmine stain. You think about the second lady's face when the first lady moved the carmine pot. You think about the handkerchief with the imperfect embroidered roses that you held for 20 minutes during the lever. You finish the soup. You return the bowl. You go back upstairs. The morning arrangements for the reception begin at noon. That gives you 3.5 hours. In those 3.5 hours you will assist in the review of the furniture arrangement in the grand salon, carry 3 separate items from one place to another at the instruction of various people, clean a candelabra that has developed a residue of wax around its base that someone has noticed and noted, and stand in a corridor for 40 minutes waiting while a dispute about the arrangement of chairs is resolved by a person whose opinion on chairs is considered authoritative. The dispute about the chairs is this. For the reception, the chairs on the left side of the salon need to be in a specific position relative to the doors, and the position they're currently in is close but not correct, and the question of how much they need to move is being discussed with the seriousness usually reserved for questions of military strategy. The person whose opinion is considered authoritative is a man called Monsieur Descartes, not the philosopher, a different one, considerably less interesting, who manages the formal arrangement of furniture for events. He's 50 years old and takes up more emotional space in any room than his physical size would suggest. He walks along the line of chairs in question, pausing at each one, placing his hand on the back, looking down the line toward the window with the expression of a man calibrating something extremely precise. 2 inches, he says. 2 inches to the left or right is not specified. The footmen who've been waiting for this instruction look at each other. 2 inches south, he clarifies. South. The footmen begin adjusting. You watch this from your position near the corridor door and try to remember the last time you were warm. The late morning has cooled the palace, which in summer means a temporary relief from the heat that will rebuild through the afternoon, and the grand salon at this hour has the specific cold of a large stone room that hasn't yet been fully heated by its morning fires, which are burning but fighting an uphill battle against the cubic footage. The marble floor contributes. The very high ceilings contribute. The fact that the windows on the garden side are letting in a breeze that is pleasant in theory, and less pleasant when you've been standing still in the same spot for 40 minutes, contribute most of all. Your feet have moved from aching to a kind of numbness that's almost meditative. The chairs are moved 2 inches south. Monsieur Descartes walks the line again. He tilts his head. He moves 1 chair a half-inch back. He tilts his head again. Good, he says. The footmen do not visibly react to having spent the morning on a half-inch. You are sent to the small anteroom next to the salon to check the flower arrangements that arrived this morning from the orangery, brought in baskets by the garden staff and now sitting in their vases waiting to be approved before being placed. The flowers are white and pale gold, formal, the kind of arrangement that is designed to be beautiful in aggregate and invisible in specificity, so that the overall effect is of rooms full of flowers without any single flower demanding attention. They smell the way fresh flowers smell early in the morning, the sharp green smell of freshly cut stems mixed with the specific floral notes of each variety. Everything still tight and upright and holding its colour with the confidence of something that doesn't know yet that it's been cut. You check them against the list, count the vases, note the condition. Everything is correct. Of course it is. The people who arrange these flowers know their work. Everyone here knows their work. That's the thing about Versailles that sometimes makes you slightly dizzy when you think about it. The competence on display every day in every corner of this operation is extraordinary. Hundreds of people, each one skilled in their specific area, each one doing their specific job at a level of precision that would astonish anyone who had never seen it. And the result is a series of rooms that smell of roses and look like paintings, and somehow house in their depths a drainage system that does not work properly, and a laundry situation that requires 400 towels a week, and a linen ledger that is Madame Vernet's permanent companion. The result is a palace that is, from the front, incomparably beautiful, and which, from the back, smells like a very large, very expensive problem. You like knowing both sides of it. You think that's probably unusual. The afternoon comes with heat. Summer afternoon heat that presses against the stone walls of the palace and seeps in around the frames of windows and turns the upper corridors, where the servants' rooms are, into something approaching an oven. By 3 in the afternoon, the temperature in your attic room, which you share with 3 other women from the household, is enough to make sleep impossible, even for someone who has been awake since 4 in the morning and would very much like to be asleep. You don't go up to your room. There's no point. You stay in the lower corridors where the stone holds some coolness, and you work, and you wait for the reception. The reception itself begins at 4, and your role in it is exactly the same as your role in most formal events. The preparation beforehand and the clean-up afterward, with a period of standing in a specific location in the middle, available if needed, mostly watching. What you watch, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, is the court assembling itself. The grand salon fills from its 4 doors simultaneously, the various groups and clusters of people arriving in the specific order that protocol demands, each person taking their position in a choreography that looks spontaneous, but is anything but. The ladies and gentlemen who populate these events have been trained since childhood in this specific kind of movement. How to enter a room, how to place yourself in relation to others, when to bow and to whom and at what angle, when to speak and when not to, and what register of voice to use when you do. They carry this training so completely that it looks like personality. It is in fact technique. The Queen is already in the room. She was there before anyone else, which is the rule. The room fills around her, and she stands near the window with 3 ladies, one of whom is the Duchesse de Polignac, whose presence today has improved the general mood of the household, because when the Duchess is absent, the Queen is sometimes less entirely herself, or more entirely herself, depending on your perspective. They're talking. The Queen's face, which you've been watching in pieces for 8 months, reflected in mirrors while you arrange things behind her, turned away from you while you manage the dressing table, directed at other people at moments when you happen to be in the same room. Her face right now is animated in a way that it sometimes isn't during the formal morning rituals. There's colour in it. She's saying something that makes the Duchess laugh. A real laugh. The kind that crinkles the corner of her eyes. And the Queen laughs too, briefly. And for about 3 seconds she looks not like the most painted and engraved and discussed and speculated about woman in Europe, but like someone who has said something that amused her friend. Then a new group enters the room, and her posture changes by a small but measurable degree, and she is the Queen again, fully, the public version. And the laugh is gone. You watch this transition the way you've watched it before, with the specific attention you've developed over 8 months of being in the same room as someone who's always performing and occasionally stopping. 3 seconds. That's what you got. 3 seconds of something that felt like a person. You wonder if that's enough for her. If 3 seconds here and there adds up to something livable. If the mathematics of it works out over a day, over a year, over a decade. You suspect the mathematics have never been run. A footman near the door catches your eye and gives a small nod toward the corridor. There's something needed somewhere. You go. The something is a tray of water glasses that needs to be brought from the anteroom, which is routine, and you carry it, and you deliver it to the sideboard at the far end of the salon, and no one in the room acknowledges this happening, and you go back to your position, and the reception continues. The rest of the afternoon passes in increments. At 5:30, the reception ends. The salon empties in its choreographed way, everyone leaving in order, the last to arrive first to go. The room releasing its gathered humanity the way a fist relaxes gradually, until there's only the furniture and the flower arrangements and the smell of the candles that were lit at 4 and are now burning steadily through the remaining hours of daylight. You begin the reset. The reset of a room after an event is a different kind of work than the preparation. Preparation is purposive. You're building towards something. Reset is diagnostic. You move through the room identifying what's changed, what's been moved, what's been used, what needs to be restored to its correct condition. A glass that's been set down on a surface that glasses shouldn't sit on. A chair that's migrated from its prescribed position during the event. A flower arrangement that's been turned slightly by someone who was standing next to it and leaning. A small stain on the carpet near the fireplace that will need attention before it sets. You work the room methodically, left to right, back to front. The chairs first, because they're the most likely to have moved, because people are always unconsciously adjusting furniture to suit their bodies without thinking about the fact that furniture in this palace exists in specific positions for specific reasons, and the reasons are not comfort. You find, near the window where the Queen was standing, a small thing on the floor. It's a piece of paper folded twice, small enough to fit in a palm. It has no distinguishing marks on the outside. It has fallen or been dropped or been set down and forgotten in the movement of the reception. You pick it up. You should give it to Madame Vernet. Everything unusual goes to Madame Vernet. Your hands hold it for a moment. There are rules about reading correspondence that isn't yours, and these rules are even stricter in a palace where correspondence is never entirely private, and everyone is always at least slightly aware that anything they write might be read by eyes other than the intended recipient. The rules say you find it, you report it, you do not read it. Your hands hold it for a longer moment. You don't open it. You're not sure why. You could, easily, and no one would ever know, because no one is watching and no one ever watches you. That's the job. Invisibility is the job. You are the thing that happens when no one is looking. You could open it, read it, know what it says, know something about the people in this room that they didn't intend you to know, but you don't. Maybe because of the handkerchief this morning, the imperfect embroidered roses that someone made with love and imperfect technique, the small private things that accumulate in a life even when your life is the most public life in France. Or maybe because you've been here long enough to understand that knowing too much in this place is not a neutral act. Information is currency here, and you are not in a position to spend it safely, and having currency you can't spend safely is just a liability. You fold the paper back to its original shape and give it to Madame Vernet. She takes it without comment. She puts it in her pocket. She will determine whose it was and return it through the appropriate channels, the same way she determines where the missing towels went and ensures the angles of pillows are correct. The machine will absorb it. The machine absorbs everything. Evening comes. Versailles in the evening in summer is a specific and complicated beauty. The long French summer twilight extends the golden light past 8, past 9, the sky above the Petit Park holding a warmth that the interior of the palace doesn't have, and the gardens take on a colour in that light that is different from anything in the formal arrangements of the daytime. The topiary goes dark at the base and warm at the top. The fountains running at full pressure now, because this is the performance hour, because important people are walking in the gardens. catch the low sun at angles that turn them briefly into falling light. You're not in the gardens. You're in the corridor outside the Queen's apartment, waiting for the evening preparations to begin. The evening toilette is a smaller, somewhat less formal version of the morning lever. Fewer attendants, less ritual, more oriented toward the practical business of preparing for whatever the evening holds and then for sleep. The layers of the day come off. The powder, the carmine, the elaborate arrangement of hair. What goes back on is simpler. A lighter robe. Simpler hair. The smell of the evening toilette is different from the morning's. The morning's about application, building up the performance, and so the morning smells of things being added, powder, perfume, cream. The evening's about removal, which has its own smell, the smell of things being undone. The warm, waxy smell of cold cream used to remove makeup. The slightly vinegar smell of the tonic used on the skin after the makeup comes off. The smell of hair loosened from its setting, of powder shaken out of it, of the natural smell of hair underneath all of that, which is human and warm and less spectacular than any of the official smells. The Queen's hair, unset, smells of powder, and something underneath the powder that is just hair. Just human hair, the same smell as anyone's hair. This is the part you've never gotten entirely used to, not because it's unpleasant, but because after 8 months of being in the same room as the most mythologized woman in France, the moments that persist aren't the grand ones, not the lever with its 40 people and its carefully ordered items, not the formal receptions with their choreographed arrivals and their 3 seconds of real laughter. The moments that persist are the ones that are just human. The hair with the powder shaken out of it, the handkerchief with the imperfect roses, the crumpled note that didn't get read, the ways she is the same as anyone, the ways the myth doesn't hold under examination. You've been in service long enough to know that this is not a safe thing to think about. The system you're part of depends on the myth holding. Everyone's position in this palace. Yours, Madame Venise, the ladies at the lever, the footmen, the coiffeur with his boxes of tools. Everything is contingent on the myth being maintained, on everyone performing their role in the ongoing production that says this person is different from other people, is more than other people, requires 40 items and 12 women just to become herself each morning. If the myth fails, the whole structure fails. And the structure failing in the current climate, you know this in a vague, unexamined way, the way you know things you've overheard without particularly trying to hear them, would not be a small event. You've heard the word in the lower corridors in the servants' room said, quickly and quietly, and then moved past, hunger. The word hunger applied to places outside this palace, outside this city even, places in the provinces where the harvests have been bad for 2 years, and the bread has become expensive, and people without money for expensive bread are, the word goes, hungry, very hungry, in a way that is different from the ordinary hungry, the always slightly hungry that most people in France live with most of the time. You came from Troyes, which is 100 miles from Paris and 60 miles from several of the places the word is attached to. Your father wrote to you in February. He wrote about the price of flour. He wrote about their neighbour, who he named but you don't know, whose situation was causing concern. He wrote about the neighbour's situation in a way that was careful and oblique, and that you read several times trying to understand what he wasn't quite saying. And what you thought he wasn't quite saying was that the neighbour was hungry in the serious way, not the ordinary way. You wrote back asking if they were well. He wrote back saying they were well. You didn't ask about the neighbour again. Here, in this corridor, outside this apartment, in this palace, No one is hungry. The kitchen runs at a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. Hundreds of people fed every day, from the most elaborate formal state dinners to the servants' table in the lower ground floor. All of it managed by a staff of dozens, all of it supplied by the farms and estates attached to the palace, the markets of Paris, the merchants who have contracts and the merchants who want contracts. The waste from this kitchen, the scraps, the surplus, the things that don't make the table, could feed, you think sometimes, quite a lot of people. You don't think this very often. It's not a thought that goes anywhere useful. The bell rings for the evening preparations. You go in. The evening toilette passes in its sequence. Cream applied and removed, powder pressed out of the hair, the small rituals of undoing. You stand at your station to the left of the dressing table, and you hand things and you receive things and you watch the elaborate performance of a woman becoming progressively simpler, layer by layer, until what remains is close to a person. The room smells of cold cream and warm hair, and the faint lingering rose of the dying flower arrangements, and, from the window that has been opened again, the evening air from the gardens, which smells of cut grass and water, and the specific green smell of things growing in the long summer light. It is, objectively, a beautiful smell. Even after a day of stone corridors and cold coal buckets, and the industrial reality of 400 towels and missing linens and Madame Vernet's ledgers, and Monsieur Descartes and his 2-inch corrections and chairs moved half an inch and a piece of paper picked up off the floor. The smell of the evening air through the window of the Queen's bedroom at Versailles is beautiful. You breathe it in. That's free. That's not part of the hierarchy. No one has priority for the smell of the evening air. You breathe it in again. The last of the ladies depart. The room is quiet. You finish the dressing table. Last check. Everything replaced. Everything aligned. And you take the linen bundle for the evening to the basket near the door, and you make a final check of the fire, which needs nothing, and you close the window to the specific angle. 2 inches, a known quantity now. Muscle memory. And you go out. In the corridor, Madame Vernet is waiting for you with the end-of-day review. This is the last formal interaction of your working day, and it happens in the linen room, which has taken on a different quality in the evening. The narrow shelves casting longer shadows. The smell of the room slightly warmer, because it's been a hot day and the stone has absorbed it. Madame Vernet goes through the day's events in her particular way, which is precise and economical and without drama. The towels were found and accounted for. The reception reset was completed to standard. The flower arrangements were disposed of correctly. The dressing table was managed. She pauses. You found something in the salon, she says. Yes, a folded note. I gave it to you directly. She looks at you for a moment. Not quite the way she usually looks at you, which is professionally, which is the look of someone assessing the performance of a task against a standard. This is slightly different, slightly more direct. You didn't read it, she says. It's not a question. No, madame. Another moment. Good, she says. She closes the ledger. Dismissed. You go. The stairs to the servants' upper floor are narrow and worn smooth in the centre, from the passage of many feet over many years, and at the end of a day like today, climbing them, you feel the specific weight of 17 hours on stone floors in your body. Not painfully exactly, but completely. The way you feel the day in your joints and your back and the soles of your feet, all of it accumulated and present now that there's no task to be focused on, no position to hold, no sequence to manage. Your room is the third door on the left. 4 beds, 4 women. Tonight, one of the other beds is already occupied. Isabel, who works in the service of one of the ladies in waiting, and who manages to be asleep by 9 o'clock regardless of what happened during the day, a talent you deeply respect. Her breathing is slow and steady. The room smells of the residual heat from the day, of the particular warmth that fabric and bodies and enclosed space create together, and faintly, Isabel uses a specific soap, of lavender. Always lavender in this place. You sit on the edge of your bed. The straw in the mattress shifts under your weight with a sound like a quiet sigh. You take off your shoes. The relief of this, the specific animal relief of taking weight off feet that have been bearing it for too long. You sit for a moment with your hands on your ankles, feeling the warmth of your own skin, and the room is quiet except for Isabel's breathing and the distant, muffled sounds of Versailles continuing to exist outside the walls. There are always sounds. The palace doesn't become silent at night. It becomes quieter, but that's a relative thing when you have thousands of people living in a building. Footsteps in distant corridors. A door. A voice somewhere that might be laughing or might be arguing, too muffled to tell. The palace settles in the cooling evening air, the stone contracting. Small sounds like someone very far away tapping on a wall. You lie back. The ceiling of your room is plain plaster. Not painted, not gilded, not allegorical. Just plaster. There's a crack in the near corner that you've been watching for 8 months, and that doesn't seem to be getting worse. Some nights you trace it with your eyes as a kind of meditation. Tonight you just look at it. You think about the morning. The smell of the bedchamber at 4:30, candle smoke, dying roses, wine, musk, the carefully managed absence of the chamber pot, the handkerchief with the imperfect roses, the second lady's face when the carmine pot was moved away from her, the Queen's face for 3 seconds when she was laughing with the Duchess, before the next group arrived and she became the Queen again. The smell of hair with the powder shaken out of it. Your father's letter in February. The careful oblique sentences about the neighbour and the price of flour. The piece of paper on the floor near the window that you didn't read. You think about these things without particularly deciding to think about them, the way the mind does at the end of a long day, bringing up its inventory not in any order of importance but in some more random sequence, the day's events losing their urgency and becoming just images, just impressions, just the residue of having been somewhere and paid attention. You've been paying attention for 8 months. This is a strange place to pay attention in. Stranger than you were prepared for back in Troy, reading the letter of introduction that your father had arranged with such careful hope, imagining Versailles the way it appears in engravings, the symmetry, the grandeur, the fountains in full operation, the ladies in their magnificent clothes. You were not wrong that those things were here. You were just not prepared for everything else that was also here. The smell of the corridor drains. Madame Vernet's ledger, the particular humiliation of the second lady's face, the 400 towels, the missing 4 that went missing for the entirely mundane reason that a lady needed to remove her makeup and no one wrote it down. The imperfect roses on the handkerchief, the evening air through the window that doesn't belong to anyone's hierarchy. All of it here, together, in the same place, making something that doesn't resolve into a simple picture of either splendour or squalor, but is instead both, simultaneously, every day, permanently. You're very tired. The sounds of the palace settle around you. Isabel's breathing, the distant tapping of the cooling stone, the very far-away echo of whatever is still happening in the lower levels of this enormous, complicated building where someone is always working, where the machine never entirely stops. You close your eyes. The darkness behind them is a complete and welcome dark, the dark of genuine exhaustion, not the sharp dark of anxiety or the complicated dark of troubled thought, but the soft dark of a body that has done what it was asked to do today and now simply needs to stop. Tomorrow morning at 4:30, the same corridor, the same basket of linens, the same smell of candle smoke and dying flowers, and the human fact of a body that requires 40 items to perform itself, the same bed to make, the same fire to tend, the same careful, invisible management of the space that a person inhabits when they are, for the performance hours, something more than a person. The same 3 seconds, maybe, of something real. The laugh that reaches the eyes, that crinkles the corners, that is gone before most people notice it happened. You notice. You've been noticing for 8 months, and tomorrow you'll notice again. That's the job, on some level, that Madame Vernet's ledger has never quite captured, and Monsieur Descartes' 2-inch corrections never address. Not just the management of linen and flowers and dressing tables, the noticing. Being present in a room where presence is structurally discouraged, where the rules say you should be furniture, and noticing anyway, quietly, invisibly, the way you've learned to do everything in this place. Noticing the imperfect stitching on the handkerchief. Noticing the second lady count the cost of a small mistake and choose not to let it show. Noticing the smell of the evening air that doesn't belong to the hierarchy. The sounds of Versailles are fading now, or you're fading from them. The way sleep takes the edges off things, softens them, brings the closer sounds and the farther sounds to the same level until they're all just the same low sound, the sound of a large place existing, the sound of stone and wood and thousands of lives humming against each other in the summer dark. The straw in the mattress is warm where you're lying. The pillow is cool on one side and warm where your face has been. You turn it. The cool side against your cheek is the best thing you have felt all day. There's something about the end of a long day on stone floors, the end of 17 hours of quiet, invisible labour, something about finally lying still in the dark that makes the body feel not defeated but resolved. Like a question that has been asked all day has finally been answered. Can you do this? Can you manage this endless, precise, invisible work? Can you hold yourself to the standard of it? Can you be present and invisible simultaneously and perform both with consistency? Today, yes. Tomorrow, ask again. The clock somewhere in the rooms below strikes 10. The sound travels up through the walls thin and clear, the particular note of a Versailles clock made by craftsmen who are paid a great deal of money to make a very specific sound. You hear it without counting the strikes. You know what time it is. You know how much time you have before 4:30 comes again. It's enough. The darkness behind your eyes has the quality that real sleep darkness has. Not the wired darkness of a mind still running, but the soft, receding darkness of a mind that has decided it's done, that has handed the job of existing over to the body for a few hours, that is beginning the long, slow loosening that ends in whatever you dream about in this place. You dream sometimes about Troyes, the market square in summer, the sound of the market, your mother's kitchen, things that are very ordinary and very distant. Sometimes you dream about the corridors of Versailles, which is perhaps the most Versailles thing that could happen to you. You take it home to sleep and then you dream it back. Tonight you don't know what you'll dream. Tonight is just the loosening, the cooling stone, the hum of the machine below. Isabel's breathing, slow and steady in the other bed. The sound of someone who has done this many times and knows how to let go of the day. You let go of the day. The smell of lavender from Isabel's soap. The smell of the evening air that came through the window, that belongs to no one's hierarchy. That was just the smell of the gardens in summer, and the growing things and the water from the fountains running through the long twilight. That smell, very faintly still in your lungs. You breathe it out. You let the rooms go one by one the way you moved through them all day. The bedchamber, the linen room, the corridor with the dying roses, the grand salon, the evening air. You let the faces go. Madame Vernet's precise brown eyes, the second lady counting the cost, the coiffer's powder-stained hands, the 3 seconds of real laughter near the window. You let the smells go. Musk and powder and cold cream and lavender and rose water, and the honest smell of the corridor drains, and the honest smell of the soup bowl warm in your hands at 7:30. You let the sounds go. The first bell of the morning, the birds in the gardens, the scrape of the chair adjustment by 1/2 inch, the clock striking 10. You let all of it settle into the soft ground of sleep, and it all does, the way it does every night, in this room, in this building, in this palace that is the most famous address in France, and one of the most famous buildings in the world, and which smells, in its hidden parts, of lavender and drains and dying roses, and the musk of a woman's presence, and cold cream, and the particular honesty of chamber pots emptied before dawn, which is to say, like a place where people live, which is all any place is underneath its performance, which is what 8 months has taught you, which is enough. The darkness now is complete and soft and final in the way that only good sleep is final. The darkness you fall into and don't remember falling into. The darkness that is not absence, but the presence of rest. The presence of the body releasing its hold on the day and allowing the day to be over. Centuries will pass. The palace you know will change beyond recognition. The corridors you move through will be filled with tourists pressing their noses against velvet ropes. The bedroom will be preserved under climate-controlled air. The handkerchief with the imperfect roses will be studied by historians who will have opinions about who made it. The queen you serve will become a symbol, be made into several different symbols simultaneously by different people with different needs. She will be the villain and the victim, and the icon, and the cautionary tale, and the martyr, and the fashion plate, and the mother, and the prisoner. She will be all of these at once, which is what symbols are. All the things that the complexity of a real person gets flattened into when the real person is no longer available to complicate the story. But in the room where you stand every morning at 4:30, with your basket of fresh linens and your single candle bending in the air as you move, she is not a symbol. She is a person who left an imperfect handkerchief on her dressing table, who has 3 seconds of real laughter when her friend says the right thing, whose hair, under the powder, smells like hair. And you are the person who notices this, who notices it and keeps it, quietly, invisibly, the way you keep everything in this place. That doesn't go away. The noticing doesn't go away. People will still live here, in whatever this place becomes. We'll still work here. We'll still find something true and small and human underneath the performance, in whatever form the performance takes in whatever era they're in. We'll still breathe evening air through a cracked window and find it beautiful. We'll still be warm enough at the end of a long day, fed enough, safe enough for the night. Some things don't change. The need for that, for the thing that's real under the performance, for the imperfect rose on the handkerchief, for the smell of something honest under the musk and the powder, that doesn't change. The human heart is always looking for the crack in the performance, where the real thing shows through. You've found yours today, and it'll be there tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that, stretching out in the long sequence of them, the 4:30 mornings and the lever and the dying roses and Madame Vanessa Leger, and the smell of stone corridors and the warmth of a soup bowl in cold hands and 3 seconds of real laughter in a gilded room, all of it yours, all of it real. The clock below strikes the half hour. You're already asleep. But sleep at Versailles is never quite what sleep is supposed to be. You know this even before you've fully fallen into it. The palace breathes around you through the night in ways that a building this size and this busy never entirely stops breathing. And somewhere around midnight, you don't know it's midnight. Your body estimates it from the quality of the dark, from the depth of the silence, from the way the air in the room has settled into its nighttime temperature. Somewhere around midnight, there's a sound in the corridor outside your door. Not close, not urgent, not the kind of sound that requires you to do anything about it, just a sound. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, moving past the door and down the corridor toward the stairs. One person, moving with the careful quietness of someone who knows the building at night and knows which floorboards creak. You lie still and listen to the footsteps until they disappear, and then you go back to sleep. But something has shifted. The deep, soft darkness of first sleep has opened a little, become lighter, become the lighter sleep of the middle of the night where you're close enough to waking. That sounds reach you, where the mind is still running at some low level, processing the day's residue. You lie in the warm dark and you think, without particularly meaning to think, about the corridors of Versailles at midnight. You haven't been in them at midnight. Your day ends at 10 and begins at 4:30, and the 6.5 hours in between are meant to be yours, are meant to be the unscheduled territory of the night. But there are people for whom midnight is a working hour, people whose jobs are specifically the nighttime jobs, the people who empty and refill and reset the palace while its official inhabitants sleep, the night footmen who maintain the lights in the corridors. Not all of them. The staterooms go dark, but certain corridors stay lit all night with reduced lighting, because a palace the size of a small city can't simply go dark. The night watchmen who walk their rounds, checking doors, checking windows, checking for the things that shouldn't be happening and sometimes are. The people who maintain the fires in the rooms where fires are maintained all night, which is more rooms than you'd think because certain items, certain dyes, certain materials, certain things in the kitchen require steady temperature, and the people who are awake because they are afraid to sleep, because they have something on their mind that the dark amplifies rather than quiets. You don't know who was in the corridor. You'll never know. That's one of the things about this place. You share it with thousands of people, and you know perhaps 40 of them, and of those 40 perhaps a dozen by name, and of those dozen perhaps 3 in any real way, which means that the vast majority of the people you inhabit this building with are strangers, and will remain strangers, and the sounds they make moving through the night corridors will remain mysterious. There's something both lonely and comforting about this. The clock below strikes 1. You turn onto your side. The pillow, cool again. The straw shifts. Sleep comes back. The morning arrives before you've finished with it. 4:30. The bell, the corridor, the basket of fresh linens and the single candle bending in the air as you move. This morning is different from yesterday in one specific way. The smell. Yesterday morning was the morning after the ball, which meant the smell in the Queen's apartment was the accumulated smell of an evening of extraordinary social performance overlaid on the ordinary smell of a bedroom. 7 hours of 800 guests in the staterooms below, and the scent of all of that had climbed through the building, the way smell climbs, upward, through doors and the gaps around windows, and settled into the curtains and the carpet of the apartment above. Today is the morning after a quiet night. The Queen retired early. There were no guests, no musicians, no 400 roses. The apartment has had a night to breathe, to release the previous day's accumulation, to return to its more basic self. And its more basic self smells like this. Musk, still, but quieter. Less a statement, more a habit. The ambient musk of a space that has been perfumed regularly for years, absorbed into every surface, present the way the smell of old books is present in a library. Not applied now, but historical, architectural, part of what the space is. Beeswax. The candles from last night's bedtime ritual, burned down to their holders, the smell of extinguished wax sitting in the cold air of the room, in the particular way of smells from things that are over, slightly sharp, slightly sweet, the smell of something that was burning and now isn't. And underneath both of those this morning, something you don't always catch, the smell of the garden, faint, very faint, but real, coming through the window sashes, through the gaps in the frames, drifting in from the parterre 2 floors below, where the gardeners have already been at work since before you arrived, cutting and trimming and watering, and the smell of wet stone and cut grass, and the particular green smell of things growing is thin and clean and entirely different from everything else in this room. You stand just inside the door for a moment, just to notice it. Then you go to the window, open it 2 inches, and the smell comes in properly, and for a moment the bedchamber of Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, smells not of musk and beeswax and powder, but of a garden in summer, and it's the most honest the room has smelled since you've been coming into it. Then the moment passes. You start the sheets. The morning lever runs shorter today. The court is still thin, recovering from the previous 2 nights, and the ladies who appear are fewer, and the ritual moves more quickly. There's no particular incident. The sequence flows without interruption. The powder rises, settles, coats everything as it always does. The carmine is passed in correct order by correct hands. You stand at your station and hold things when asked to hold things, and watch when there's nothing to hold. After the lever, Madame Vernet has a different assignment for you. The attics, she says, in the way she says all things, flatly, precisely, as a statement of fact rather than a request. The attics. You look at her. The northwest storage wing. There's a full inventory outstanding. G was meant to do it last week and it hasn't been done. I need you to go through the lot and give me a count on the linens in storage. Not the working inventory, the stored surplus. Everything that's been put away for rotation. This is not a glamorous assignment. This is not even a particularly interesting assignment. This is the kind of job that falls to people who are trusted with accuracy, and who are free from other obligations for the morning, which you currently are, because the morning's lever work is complete, and the afternoon reception has been moved, and there is no formal event today until this evening's supper. The northwest wing, you confirm. Take the corridor past the laundry, Left at the column, up 2 flights. You're looking for the rooms marked with a white cross. She hands you the secondary ledger, the one with the surplus inventory last recorded. Add to this. Note condition. I want to know what we have. You take the ledger. The northwest attic of Versailles is a part of the palace you haven't been to. You know the routes you use daily with the fluency of a practiced map, but the palace is vast enough that there are whole sections of it you haven't explored, whole architectural territories that exist outside your regular paths. The northwest wing is one of them. You know it exists. You know roughly where it is. You've never had a reason to go there. You go now. The corridor past the laundry is easy to find. The laundry makes itself known from 30 yards away by smell, which is the complex industrial smell of commercial laundering. Hot water, lye soap, starch. The wet cotton smell of things being washed and wrung. The steam that rises off the vats and turns the air in the corridor outside the laundry room to something heavy and warm and slightly sour. The laundry room itself is, when you pass its open door, a controlled chaos of activity. 6 women working at the vats, their arms submerged to the elbow in hot water, their faces red with steam. 2 more at the wringing frames. 1 at the ironing table, lifting a heavy iron with both hands, pressing it down on white fabric with a practiced weight that leaves a section of perfectly smooth linen in its wake, and a hiss of steam where the hot iron meets the damp cloth. The sound of the laundry is the sound of physical work. The sloshing of water, the rhythmic compression of wringing, the hiss and thump of the iron, and underneath all of that the voices of the women, talking to each other in the low, companionable tones of people who've been working alongside each other for years, and have run out of things to say but continue saying them anyway, because the alternative is silence, and silence in a laundry is just the noise of the work without the comfort of human voice. You pass the door. You turn left at the column Madame Vernet described, and the corridor here is different from the ones you're used to. Narrower, less trafficked. The floor sweeping still but showing its stone without the thin layer of foot polish that the main corridors develop from constant use. The walls are plain. There are no paintings, no decorative mouldings, no evidence that this part of the building was designed to be seen by anyone other than the people who work in it. This is the deep architecture of Versailles. The skeleton underneath the skin. 2 flights of stairs, bare stone, the handrail iron rather than gilded, and you arrive at a door marked with a white cross in chalk on the wood above the lintel. You open it. The smell is the first thing. Lavender, old lavender, the smell of lavender sachets that have been sitting among folded fabric for months or years. The dried flower smell that is familiar but here is extreme, concentrated. The result of hundreds of sachets among hundreds of layers of fabric in an enclosed space. It hits you when you open the door, and you stand for a moment adjusting to it, the way you adjust when you come in from cold air to a heated room. Underneath the lavender, linen. The specific clean smell of good linen stored correctly, the slight crispness of starched fabric, the faintly mineral smell of the linen itself, which is plant fibre processed by human labour, and pressed and folded and put away. The room is large, surprisingly large, with a low ceiling and 2 small windows that let in thin, pale morning light. The shelves go from floor to ceiling, and they're stacked with fabric in the orderly fashion that someone, whoever was responsible for this storage, some previous Madame Vernet, or some ancestor of the system you're part of, imposed on it years ago. Sheets on the left, organised by size from smallest to largest. The marks of the sizing system faded but legible on the shelf edges. Towels in the middle, stacked in piles that have been allowed to grow unevenly and which are now leaning slightly toward each other. Miscellaneous items on the right, the catch-all category of storage. Things that don't fit neatly into a category, items awaiting assignment, items retired from service but not yet disposed of. You stand in the doorway for a moment and take it in. Then you go to work. The count takes longer than you expected, not because the inventory is complicated, but because the sheer volume of material in this room is remarkable. Counting things accurately requires you to pull them from their shelves and count them and note them and replace them. And the replacing is where the time goes because the piles are uneven, and returning them to order involves straightening work that wasn't in the brief, but that you find yourself doing anyway, because a thing half done is bothering in a way you can't entirely explain. Madame Vernet's influence. The fabric that passes through your hands up here is older than what you work with downstairs. Some of it has the slightly yellowed look of linen that's been stored for a long time. Not damaged, not stained, but aged in the way that white things age when they're kept away from light and not used. The edges of some sheets have a faint brownish tinge where they've been folded for years, the fold lines absorbing something from the air. The lavender sachets tucked between them are dry as paper, reduced from whatever they were originally to small linen bags of pale grey-green dust. You count, you note, you move through the shelves in order. And in the middle of this counting, in the middle of this quiet, systematic work in this attic room that smells of old lavender and linen in a part of the palace that almost no one comes to, you find something, not a dramatic something, not a piece of paper this time, not something that requires a decision about whether to read it, just a box, a small wooden box, not decorated, sitting on the shelf behind a stack of pillowcases pushed to the back. The kind of box that holds small things, the kind of box that ends up in storage rooms because no one threw it away but no one had use for it either. You would have noted it as miscellaneous storage and moved on, except that it's sitting slightly oddly, at an angle, as if it was placed there quickly or in the dark, and something about the angle catches your eye. You pull it out. It's lighter than you expect. You open it. Inside, on a small piece of folded cloth, are perhaps 24 of the lavender sachets that fill the storage room, but these ones aren't the plain linen kind. These are embroidered. Small, careful embroidery on each one, not professional quality, not the controlled precision of the court embroiderers, but the confident embroidery of someone who knows what they're doing and is doing it with care. Roses mostly, but varied. Some with leaves, some without. Different varieties, different stages of bloom. Each sachet slightly different from the others, as if they were made in a series over time, each one an iteration on the last. You pick one up. The lavender inside has dried completely. The smell is faint. You have to hold it close to smell it. The embroidery thread is silk in pale colours, the pink of the roses faded but still present. Someone made these, in significant numbers, over what must have been a significant amount of time. Someone who knew that they were making them for this room, for this storage, for the purpose of keeping fabric smelling of lavender for as long as possible. Someone who made something useful and beautiful for a purpose that no one would ever see. You hold one in your palm for a moment. The stitching is the same quality as the handkerchief on the dressing table downstairs. The same slight unevenness in the curves, the same decision to make something imperfect but sincere over something perfect and impersonal. You don't know if they're connected. You'll probably never know. You put the sachet back in the box. You put the box back where you found it, at its odd angle behind the pillowcases, and you keep counting. The count finishes at 11:30. You've been in the attic for nearly 4 hours and your back knows it and your knees know it, and your fingers are slightly dry from the old fabric. The secondary ledger has 47 new entries. Madame Vernet will be pleased with the thoroughness. You go down the stairs and back through the laundry corridor. The smell of the laundry has shifted now mid-morning. More steam and less soap. The water in the vat. There's a small box, old lavender sachets embroidered. I've noted them under miscellaneous, but I didn't know who to attribute them to. A pause. Madame Vernet's expression shifts by a fraction. Not much, but something. Leave them where they are, she says. Yes, madam. They've been there for 22 years. She looks back at her ledger. You leave. The afternoon before the supper is different from the afternoon before the reception. A supper is smaller, more intimate by court standards, which means 60 people rather than 200, which means the rooms required are less extensive and the preparation more focused. You work through the early afternoon on the table settings in the inner dining room, not the great state dining room with its ceiling paintings and its silver service of 800 pieces, but the smaller room, the one used for what counts as informal dining at Versailles, which is to say dining where the ceremony is present but slightly reduced, where the rules about who sits where are slightly less elaborately codified, where the conversation is allowed to be something approaching natural. The table in this room is long enough to seat 36, which at full extension it will tonight, and the setting of it is a precision task that has its own rules and its own hierarchy of objects. The silver is laid by the people responsible for the silver, who are not you. The crystal is laid by the people responsible for the crystal, who are also not you. What you manage this afternoon is the linen, the tablecloth, which is a single piece of fabric the entire length of the table and must be positioned without a wrinkle, which is an exercise in coordination that requires two people working from opposite ends, and the napkins, which are folded in the specific way that supper napkins are folded at Versailles, a way that involves 3 separate folds and a specific final tuck that creates a shape that you were shown on your first week and that you practiced for 2 evenings before you could do it reliably. The woman working the other end of the tablecloth is called Marie Anne. She's been here 11 years. She's perhaps 30, though it's hard to tell in this building where the indoor light and the work make everyone look either younger or older than they are. She has red hair, genuinely red, the kind that came from somewhere in her ancestry, and that she covers under her cap but which shows at the edges and which is, you've thought, the most immediately distinctive thing about any person in a building where everyone wears the same working clothes. Marie Anne knows the tablecloth operation the way she knows all operations she's been doing for 11 years in her body without having to think about it. Her end goes on first, edges aligned. She works toward the centre, and you match her from your end, the linen stretching out between you white and precisely ironed, the smell of the iron still in it, the smell of starch, the smell of the lavender from the final rinse. The supper tonight, she says as you work, not a question, just an opening. The usual count? 36, they said, but they always add 2. This is a known quantity. The official count for palace events is always approximately 2 fewer than the actual count, because there are always last-minute additions, people who are not on the original list, but who arrive with someone who is, or who send word in the final hour that they'll be attending after all, and the convention is to absorb these additions without comment, which requires that the preparation always account for them. The weather's changed, Marie Anne says. You look up. Through the window of the dining room which faces west, you can see that she's right. The sky over the gardens has shifted from the clear blue of this morning to something with more texture. Clouds building at the horizon, the particular grey-white of summer afternoon clouds that might mean nothing and might mean rain. Before or after supper, you ask? She makes a sound that isn't quite a laugh. Not my problem after the table's set. This is the practical philosophy of palace service. Your responsibility ends at the edge of your domain and begins again at the edge of the next. The weather is not your department. The tablecloth goes down without a wrinkle. You move to the napkins. The napkin fold is, first fold the square into a rectangle, aligning the edges precisely, the fabric requiring a slight pressure along the fold to crease it cleanly. Second fold, the rectangle into a smaller rectangle, again precise. Third fold, the long edge up and the tuck, a specific tuck that creates the standing shape that will hold on the plate. The tuck requires pressure from both thumbs simultaneously, and there's a right way to do it, and a way that looks right but isn't. And the difference is invisible until you set it on the plate, and the wrong way slowly relaxes into a flat napkin, while the right way holds its shape until someone lifts it. You do 36 napkins, then 2 more for the additions. Your hands know the sequence. The weather outside is building towards something. The light in the room has changed, gone from the direct afternoon sun of an hour ago to the more diffuse light of cloud cover, and the colours of everything in the room are slightly different in this light. Less warm, more neutral, the white of the tablecloth becoming a brighter, sharper white without the gold of direct sun, the silver of the cutlery taking on a cooler sheen. 38 napkins standing on their plates holding their shape. Good. The supper itself begins at 7. From your position in the outer corridor during the portion of the evening when you're on standby, you can hear it. The sound of 60 people having a conversation at a volume calibrated to the size of the room, the clink of the silver and crystal, occasional laughter, the specific sound that a formal supper at a palace makes, which is unlike any other social sound you've encountered, which is the sound of people performing relaxation within structures so elaborate and so precisely observed that the performance is almost invisible. Almost. You've become good at hearing through the almost. The supper goes for 2 hours. At 9:30, the doors to the dining room open and the guests begin to disperse, and you and 2 others move in behind them to begin the reset, the clearing, the return of the room to its prepared state. The table after supper smells of food and wine, and the particular warm human smell of 36 people having occupied a space for 2 hours. There are the remnants of dishes. The plates have been removed by the footman, but the smell of what was on them lingers. The rich smell of meat sauces, the sharper smell of the fish course, the sweetness of the dessert wines. The napkins are unfolded and crumpled and set down in the various ways that people set things down when they're done with them, each one a small record of a specific person's particular carelessness or care. You collect the napkins. They go into the linen basket for the laundry, where tomorrow morning they'll be transformed back into clean-folded linen, pressed and ready for the next event, their brief record of this specific supper washed away along with whatever else accumulated on them during the evening. The tablecloth comes off with Marie Anne again, and it's heavier now with the various small spills and deposits of an evening of dining. Mostly invisible, but present in the slightly stiff quality of the linen, in the smell of it, which is no longer only the clean iron and lavender smell of preparation, but is now the more complicated smell of use. "Decent evening," Marie Anne says, folding her end. "No incidents?" "None I heard about." She looks at her end of the cloth, checking. 3 wine rings on my side, they'll come out. This is the optimism of someone who has done laundry work long enough to know that almost everything comes out. that the linen will be collected tonight and washed tomorrow and returned the day after and laid again on this table, as if this evening hadn't happened, as if 36 people hadn't sat here and eaten and talked and left their small marks on the fabric. The palace is very good at this kind of erasure, which is, when you think about it, another word for your job. The last thing you do in the dining room is make sure the chairs are returned to their positions. The supper guests, departing, push chairs back at various angles and in various states of displacement, and the chairs need to be returned to their specific positions, which are marked by small indentations in the carpet, where the legs have been placed so many times that the carpet has learned to hold them. The carpet knows where the chairs go. That is perhaps the most Versailles fact about Versailles, that the carpet has been trained by repetition to hold the positions of the furniture. You push the last chair in. The legs settle into their indentations with the small satisfying thud of something returning to its right place. The room is ready. You go out. Outside, the weather has made good on its threat. Rain is falling on the gardens of Versailles, soft and steady. The summer rain that comes in the evening sometimes and lays the dust and cools the stone and fills the basins of the fountains with something that isn't the carefully managed water of the hydraulic systems, but real rain, falling because it feels like it, unconcerned with the schedule of the court. You stand in the open doorway of the service entrance for a moment. Not the main entrance, obviously. Not the entrance that tourists and courtiers use, but the side door that the service staff use, which opens onto a small stone courtyard between wings, and you listen to the rain on the stone. It's a good sound. It's a completely unmanaged sound. No one at Versailles scheduled this. No one's job it is to produce it or maintain it or evaluate its quality or ensure it's happening at the correct angle or intensity. It just falls. You hold your hand out from under the doorway overhang and feel it on your palm. Cool drops, irregularly spaced, the randomness of real things. Behind you, in the palace, the corridors are busy with the end of evening traffic. People moving from the completed supper to wherever they're going next. The machine of the evening reorganizing itself for the night. Footsteps, voices, doors. Out here, just rain. You stand here longer than you should. Then you go in. The night passes, the morning comes, and then another morning after that. And here is where it gets harder to tell. Because the days at Versailles have a similarity that makes them blur together, not from boredom, but from density. Each day is dense with its specific events, its specific tasks, its specific increments of the ongoing work of keeping this place running. And the density of each individual day means that when you try to hold several of them together in memory, they slide against each other and lose their edges. What you remember, after the first weeks become months, is not specific days, but specific knowledge. Things you've learned in the accumulation of mornings and afternoons and evenings. You've learned the smell of the corridors in different seasons. In autumn, the stone gives off a different quality of cold than in summer, a deeper cold that comes from the walls having released their summer heat and not yet received the winter fire's warmth. A cold that smells almost of mineral, almost of cave. In winter, the fires burning all through the palace's occupied rooms create a warmth in the public corridors, but the service passages behind the walls stay cold regardless, and the smell of coal smoke becomes part of the air you breathe in a way that summer's candle smoke isn't quite. More pervasive, more settled, as if the smoke from 1,000 fires has stained the air itself a slightly different colour. In spring the gardens come back and the smell of them comes through the windows again. But spring is different from summer. The spring smell is greener, sharper. The smell of things growing for the first time rather than things grown and fully expressed. The smell of beginning rather than peak. You've learned that Madame Vernet's instructions, which are always precise and always correctly prioritized, and which you initially received as an external authority to be followed, have gradually become internal. You know what she would say before she says it. You know which drawer the specific cloth for cleaning carmine lives in, not because you consulted a system, but because your hands have gone to it so many times that your hands know. This is what 8 months becomes, what a year becomes, what the accumulation of precise, repetitive, attentive work becomes. Not boredom, not numbness, a kind of fluency. You've become fluent in a place, in its specific language of smell and order and hierarchy and the hidden work underneath the performance. And fluency in a place is a kind of love for it. Even if the place is difficult, even if the place is cold and hard-floored and governed by rules that sometimes make you want to sit down in the middle of a corridor and ask someone to explain to you very slowly what the point is. Fluency is its own attachment, its own form of home. But home is a complicated word for Versailles. Because Versailles is also this. It is October now. And you know it's October not because the calendar tells you. You barely consult a calendar. The palace runs on its own schedule of events and seasons rather than months. But because the light has changed and the gardens have changed and the smells have changed. The gardens in October are in the process of being put to bed. The formal plantings are being cut back and the bedding plants are being pulled and the bulbs for next year's display are being planted. The topiary is receiving its final trim of the season, the shears cutting with the particular sound of metal on vegetation that carries in the cooler air all the way up to the windows of the staterooms. And the gardeners, this October, are working harder than usual, not because there's more garden work to do, because there's something else going on. Something you're aware of in the way you're aware of weather building on the horizon. Not seeing it directly, but sensing the change in pressure. The word you heard in February, hunger, has become more frequent. It's not just in the servants' lower corridors anymore. It's in the language of the court, present in conversations you overhear while holding things at the lever, while standing at your station during events, while moving through corridors that are increasingly full of people who are not talking about fashion or music, but about something else, something in a register you've only started to recognise. The price of bread in Paris, that's what you catch, in fragments, the price of bread in Paris. People saying it the way people mention weather when they're actually worrying about something else. Casually and not casually at all. You don't know what bread costs in Paris. You know what bread costs in Troy, approximately, because your father mentioned it in the letter in February. More than usual was the careful phrase he used. More than usual. The men and women of the court don't talk about bread the way your father talks about bread. When they mention it as a political fact, as a social fact, as a thing that is happening to other people that has implications for the stability of things. They speak about the poor with the particular cadence of people speaking about weather, describing a natural phenomenon that affects others more directly than themselves. Standing in a room while people speak about hunger in this register is a specific experience. You stand there and you hold things and you don't react because reacting is not in the brief, and the brief is what you follow. But you notice. You file it away with the handkerchief and the note on the floor, and the embroidered sachets in the attic box, and the second lady's counted cost. The morning of the first hard frost, which comes in early November, You arrive at the Queen's apartment to find that 2 of the rose arrangements have been removed already, replaced with something more austere, forced branches in pale glass vases, the kind of arrangement that acknowledges the season is over and the garden is sleeping. The smell of the bedroom is different without the roses, cleaner, more mineral. The musk is the same, the beeswax is the same, but the floral overlay that has been present every morning since you arrived is absent now, and the room's bass notes are exposed. This is what the room is without its decoration. Stone and wax and the ghost of a woman's presence, and the faint, persistent smell of the corridor drains 1 floor below. It's more honest without the roses. The Queen, coming in for the lever, doesn't seem to notice the difference in the arrangements, or notices and doesn't react. You've learned that these 2 things look identical from the outside. The lever runs its sequence. The powder rises. You stand at your station. The cold in the corridors this morning has made your hands slower. You've been wearing thinner gloves than you should, and your fingers have the particular stiffness that comes from cold that's been absorbed and hasn't yet been warmed out. When you're handed the small glass bottle to set back on the dressing table, your grip is less sure than usual, and you feel it. The slight uncertainty of cold fingers, and you hold the bottle more carefully as a result, with both hands, which is correct form anyway, but which you don't always observe strictly. Madame Vernet, who sees everything, says nothing. After the lever, you go to the linen room for the morning review, and there are no missing towels today and no incidents to account for, and the review takes 5 minutes, and then Madame Vernet says something she hasn't said before. The Queen has asked that the afternoon preparation be simplified. You wait. Less powder on the dressing table, she said. A pause. The kind of pause that contains a quotation being recalled precisely, that we're not having a party every day. A longer pause. You don't say anything. She's right, Madame Vernet says. This is possibly the most unexpected sentence she's said in the 9 months you've known her. Adjust the arrangement. Remove the second powder box. It won't be needed for ordinary afternoons. The one with the rose tone? That one. Put it in the drawer. Keep it accessible. Yes, madame. She looks back at her ledger. And the flower arrangements. She wants them simpler. Fewer blooms. She said, another precise pause, that we're wasting money on things that die. You think about the roses from the ball, the 400 of them, the dying smell of the ones that were left overnight. You don't say this. Simpler arrangements, you confirm. Noted. There's something in the room after this, in the moment after these instructions, that you register without being able to name. A shift. A very slight adjustment in the atmosphere of the linen room, between Madame Vernet with her 29 years and her ledger, and you with your 9 months and your growing fluency. A conversation happening in the space between the said things. She knows what you're thinking. You know she knows. Neither of you says it, because neither of you can say it. Not here, not in this room, not in this building where the performance is everything, and the infrastructure exists to serve the performance, and the performance is that everything is exactly as it should be, and exactly as it has always been. She returns to her ledger. You go to adjust the dressing table. The second powder box is pale pink and its lid is edged with gilt. It sits on the dressing table now, the way it always has, in its position between the first box and the glass rod, part of the arrangement that your hands can reproduce in the dark. You open the second drawer and you clear a space for it, moving the small leather case with the needles and thread to the back, and you set the powder box in the drawer and you close it. The dressing table without it is slightly different. The arrangement is more spare. There are gaps that weren't there before. You look at it for a moment. Then you adjust the remaining items to fill the gaps. The table looks fine. It looks correct. Someone who didn't know exactly what was here before would not notice anything missing, which is, you think something about this place in general, something about the way things change here, incrementally, quietly, through small adjustments and removals and simplifications, through powder boxes moved to drawers and 400 roses reduced to forced branches in pale vases, that the change is only visible to the people who've been paying the specific, precise, invisible attention that this place requires. The people who hold the things and arrange the surfaces, the infrastructure, the machine. You. The afternoon is quiet, and in the quiet you have the rare thing, an hour without an immediate task. Madame Vernier has sent you to the garden level to confirm a delivery of supplies from the orangery, and the delivery is slightly late, and you wait for it in the small room next to the garden entrance, with the door cracked open, and the garden is there, right there. The autumn garden in its particular form. The beds cut back, the paths still neat, the fountains turned off for the season, their basins silent and filling slowly with leaves. The last of the afternoon light is on the garden. November light, which is a different quality from any other month's light. Lower in the sky, more golden but also thinner, the kind of light that illuminates things at an angle and catches details that the direct overhead light of summer misses. The carved stone of the balustrades, the texture of the gravel on the paths, the patterns of the empty beds, the dark earth showing through where the plants have been removed. You've been inside this building almost every day for 9 months. You step out. The air is cold. Your breath makes a brief cloud in front of your face before the light breeze disperses it. The garden smells of autumn. Damp soil, decaying leaves, the slightly sharp smell of the cut-back plants releasing their last moisture into the cooling air. You walk to the edge of the nearest parterre and look out across it. From here you can see the long axis of the gardens extending south, the perspective that the designers intended, the one that makes the garden look even larger than it is by creating a single strong line from the palace all the way to the horizon. The fountains are off and the basins are dark and still, reflecting the November sky. At the far end of the garden, where the tapis vert ends, you can see the heads of the trees in the bosquets, the ornamental groves that line the garden's main axis, their leaves mostly gone now, the bare branches showing. This is the garden that the court sees as a backdrop, the magnificent stage set for the spectacular theatre of Versailles. From here, from this angle, without the fountains running and the parties and the coaches and the elaborate performances, it looks like something else. It looks like a garden in autumn. Just that. Just a large, well-designed garden in late autumn, which is a beautiful thing but quietly, without performance. The fountain basins catch the last of the light. The leaves on the path near you make a small sound in the breeze, a dry rustling, the sound of things that have been released finally after holding on. Behind you, from the direction of the delivery entrance, you hear the sound of carts arriving. The supplies are here. You go back in. The delivery is inventoried and noted and signed for and sent to the correct storage rooms, and by the time you've done this, the light outside has shifted to the flat grey of late November afternoon, the brief quality light gone, replaced by the ordinary grey that will be the light for the next 4 months. The palace responds to this by lighting more candles, hundreds more, because the shorter days mean more dark to push back, and pushing back the dark at Versailles is an operation conducted at scale. The candle consumption of this palace in the winter months is a number that would stagger a household that operates on ordinary proportions. The linen inventory and the candle inventory and the coal inventory are the three great consuming operations of the palace in winter, and all three expand simultaneously when November arrives. You carry 4 boxes of new candles from the supply room to the main corridor staging area, where they'll be distributed to the various rooms by the teams responsible for them. The boxes are heavy in a particular way. Candle wax is dense, and your arms feel it by the 4th one. The candles smell of beeswax, not yet burning, not yet the smoke and sweet smell of lit candles, just the raw wax itself, which smells faintly of honey, or of the memory of honey, of the original material before it was processed into this purpose. Someone somewhere raised bees for this. The bees collected pollen from flowers for this. An entire small ecosystem fed into the decision to push back the dark at Versailles. You set the last box down. Breathe. The evening is coming, and now the weeks are moving faster. This is the thing about learning a place. Once you're fluent in it, time changes quality. The early weeks at Versailles were enormous, each day vast with things you didn't know and had to learn, each hour loaded with new information. Now the days are denser but faster, because the knowledge is integrated, because your body knows the routes, and your hands know the sequences, and your nose knows the morning smells, and your feet know the floors, and the days slide by in the continuous present of established competence. You are, in October and November and December of your first full year, becoming something you hadn't expected. Not just good at your job. That was always the goal, the practical aim, the thing your father's letter of introduction was aimed toward. Good at the job was what you came here to become. But something beyond that. You are becoming a kind of witness. There are things that happen in this palace that very few people are positioned to see. Not the official things, the choreographed things, the things that the court intends to display, but the other things, the things that happen in the spaces between the performances, in the service corridors, in the attic storage rooms, at 4:30 in the morning when the official day hasn't started yet, and the rooms are occupied only by the people whose job is to make the official day possible. You're positioned for all of these. You see Madame Vernet, who presents a face of perfect control and complete authority to the world, occasionally stand in the linen room at the end of a day and look at her ledger with an expression that is only visible to anyone standing behind her at that moment, which is rarely anyone at all, and which is the expression of someone who is very tired and doing the math on how many more days this particular calculation has to come out right. You see the Countess, who is First Lady on Tuesday mornings, who handles the lever with impeccable precision every time, drop her gloves in the outer corridor before entering the apartment, and bend down to pick them up, and her hands, when they hold the gloves, have a slight tremor that is not visible when she's performing the lever, because when she's performing the lever, her hands are controlled by something beyond whatever is causing the tremor. You see the coiffeur who arrives every morning with his boxes of tools and his slightly harried expression, sit in the anteroom between his arrival and the beginning of the lever and open a small notebook and read it. Not the way you read a book for pleasure or instruction, but the way you read something you're trying to memorize, his lips moving slightly, rehearsing something. You see the second lady, the one who reached for the carmine pot at the wrong moment, navigating the remaining months of the year with a kind of careful precision that makes her correct in every interaction. Never wrong, never early, never late, never reaching for anything that isn't hers to reach for. She's learned her lesson. She's applying it. She moves through the apartment with the controlled accuracy of someone who has decided that the cost of imprecision is too high, and she pays the cost of absolute precision in the tight quality of her shoulders and the way she never quite relaxes when she's in the room. The price of getting things right is that someone is always watching for when you get them wrong. You see all of this. You file it. Not deliberately, not as an archive, not as anything useful, just as the accumulation of being in a place and paying attention. The way your eye registers the dying roses in the attic arrangement every time they hit the exact moment before the petals start to fall, the moment that is the richest and the most precarious simultaneously. The way you hold the handkerchief with the imperfect roses for 20 minutes at the lever and feel the stitching, and think about the distance the affection had to travel to arrive here. The way the smell of the evening garden coming through the 2 inches of open window is the most honest smell in the room. You carry all of this. It's weightless. It fits in the pockets that invisible people have. December comes, and December at Versailles is, if anything, more elaborate than the rest of the year. The court calendar in the winter months is full, the festivities building toward the year's end and the New Year's beginning. There are balls and suppers and formal receptions, all in the cold stone rooms with their armies of candles fighting the dark, all requiring the full operation of the machine to support them. You work more hours in December than any other month. The days stretch at both ends and the nights compress, and you're running on less sleep than you were in summer, which was already less than enough, and the body gets inventive when it runs on less sleep. It finds reserves that normal life doesn't require, and the tiredness becomes a different thing, less acute and more pervasive, a condition rather than a complaint. But the smell of December is different. It is the smell of cold stone and coal fires and beeswax candles burning all day now because the days are short, and the fires and candles are the only warmth and light available. And it is also now the smell of the preparations for Christmas, which means pine branches brought in from the gardens and arranged in the public rooms, and their smell, the particular sharp green cold smell of pine, which is a smell from outdoors, from the natural world, from places that are not performance, moves through the palace in a way that the rose arrangements of summer don't, more insistent, more present, cutting through the palace's usual overlay of perfume and beeswax with something that has no pretension to elegance. It is elegant anyway. You're carrying a bundle of pine branches down the main service corridor toward the third antechamber when you hear it. Not a dramatic sound, not a bell or a shout or anything that announces itself as significant, just a voice coming through the wall from the room on the other side of it. A woman's voice, singing. You know the voice, or you know the timbre of it, this specific quality that you've registered over a year of being in the same room as the same person, without being acknowledged by that person. The voice at the lever, speaking to the ladies in the flat, even tones of someone who's been conducting this ritual for so long that the spoken parts of it require no engagement. The voice at the reception, animated and close to real. The voice asking the Duchess something that made her laugh. This voice is different. It's singing something you don't recognize. Not a known song or not a complete song. Just a fragment. A few bars of melody repeated. The kind of singing that is entirely private, that someone does when they believe themselves alone and unheard, when singing serves no purpose except the satisfaction of producing sound. She's in the petit salon, the small private room between the official apartments and the more private cabinet that she uses when she wants to escape the formal rooms. She's alone in it, or nearly alone. No one would be nearby or this wouldn't be happening. And she's singing, not performing, not for anyone, just singing. You hold the pine branches and you stand in the corridor and the voice comes through the wall and you hear it. It lasts perhaps 30 seconds, then stops. The silence after is complete and ordinary. You shift the pine branches in your arms and continue down the corridor. You don't tell anyone. Not because you've made a decision about it, not because you've calculated that secrecy is the correct response. Just because there's nothing to tell. What would you say? You heard a voice through a wall. You heard someone sing something to themselves in a quiet room. You heard a person being a person. That's all it was. That's everything it was. You carry the pine to the third antechamber and arrange it in the holders the way you've been shown, the branches pointing in the direction that makes them look fullest. The smell of them sharp and cold and honest in the overheated air of the room. The smell of pine branches in a gilded room. The smell of something outside inside. The smell, if you had to give it a word, of contradiction. Which is the smell of this place, when you reduce it to its elements. The most magnificent address in France. And a woman singing to herself in a small room because no one is listening. The linen with the imperfect embroidered sachets in the attic box no one touches. The handkerchief made by someone who loved her enough to do it imperfectly. The second lady with her tight shoulders and her counted caution. Madame Vernet with her tired eyes looking at the ledger at the end of the day. The soup bowl warm in your hands at 7:30. The rain on the garden stone, all of it here, all of it yours, all of it real. And now it's late, and the palace is settling into its winter night. The fires banked for the long hours, the candles in the corridors turned to their lowest light. The sound of the footsteps in the far passages reduced to the occasional single set of measured steps, a watchman on his round. You're in your room. The other beds are occupied. Isabel breathing her steady breathing. Marie, who came in the autumn, turning in her sleep with a soft sound. Hélène, who doesn't sleep well and who you sometimes hear awake at odd hours, is still tonight. 4 women in an attic room in the most famous palace in the world, and the room is a room, and the night is a night, and the tiredness in your body is just the honest tiredness of labour honestly done. The pine smell has come up even here, faint but present, carried on the warm air that rises through the building from the rooms below where the arrangements are placed. The cold mineral smell of the stone, the faint lavender from the linen, the close warm smell of the room itself, of 4 people sleeping, all the smells layered, the real smell of the place, not the performance, the truth underneath it. You've been learning this truth for a year. The smell of dead flowers at 5 in the morning, the smell of the chamber pot behind the roses, the smell of good soup in a plain bowl, the smell of pine branches cut from a living tree and brought inside to serve as decoration for people who will be inside all winter and who need the smell of something real to carry them through. The smell of 30 seconds of private singing through a wall. You carry all of it. And now you release it. The way you release everything at the end of the day, because releasing it is what makes tomorrow possible. Because you can't carry the full accumulation of a year of attention and still walk through the corridors with the quiet, purposive invisibility that the job requires. So you let it go. The day goes first. The specific tasks and sequences and smells and sounds of this particular day releasing like heat from the stone at the end of winter, passing into the air and dispersing. Then the week. The week goes softer, vaguer, the edges blurring. Then the month, which was December, which was cold and pine-scented and full of candles, and the building sound of something outside the palace that you heard in fragments and didn't look at directly. Then the year, all of it. Your year at Versailles, which began in late winter with the shock of it, the scale of it, the smell of the corridor drains and the distant grandeur, and which became gradually the place you live. It goes soft at the edges. It becomes warmth rather than detail. It becomes the specific warmth of knowing a place, of being known by a place, of belonging somewhere in the functional sense, even if belonging feels like too large a word for what you are here, which is always present and never visible. But you are visible to yourself. You've been seeing this place clearly for a year. That's yours. That counts. The clock below strikes 11, 12. The sound of each strike fading almost before it arrives. The palace breathes around you in its winter way, the coal fire settling, the stone releasing its cold into the rooms, the watchman's footsteps steady and distant and reassuring in their regularity. Some things don't change. The watchman has been walking these corridors for 20 years, the same route, the same pace, the same half-hour intervals. His footsteps are as much part of the architecture of this place as the stone itself, as Madame Vernet's ledger, as the carved faces above the doorways looking down at all the people moving beneath them, and the embroidered sachets in the attic box, and the handkerchief on the dressing table, and the 2 inches of open window, and the smell of the morning garden coming in. All of it, here. All of it, real. You. Warm enough in the winter room, tired enough to sleep, present enough to have carried the day fully, every part of it, the pine branches and the cold hands and the 30 seconds of singing and the soup at 7:30, and the fresh linen on the morning bed and the smell of the whole enormous, beautiful, difficult place. You carried it. You always carry it. And now you put it down. Let it go the way the leaves go in the autumn garden. Released, finally, after holding on as long as holding on makes sense. Let the sounds of the palace settle into a single low note. The hum of a building that contains thousands of lives and holds them in its stone, and keeps them warm enough, keeps them fed enough, keeps them at their work and their sleep and their quiet, private moments. Let the smells go, one by one, the way you learned them one by one. The musk and the beeswax, the lavender and the cold cream, the iron and the linen, the pine and the autumn earth, and the rain on the stone, the soup and the bread and the honest smell of your own hands at the end of a day they've worked. Let the faces go, Madame Vernet's eyes, the imperfect embroidered roses, the second lady counting, the 3 seconds of real laughter, the 30 seconds of singing. Let them settle into the soft bed of sleep the way everything settles eventually, completely, warmly, without loss. Because you'll carry them again tomorrow. They'll be waiting in the morning at 4:30 when the bell rings and you rise in the dark and take your candle and walk the corridor toward the light. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be linens and dressing tables and the lever and the powder rising in the warm air. Tomorrow there will be Madame Vernet and her ledger and the precise placement of things. Tomorrow there will be possibly the smell of the garden through 2 inches of open window and the smell of morning air that belongs to no one's hierarchy and which is therefore, briefly, freely, yours. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this, the dark, the warmth of the room, the slow breathing of women who have worked all day and earned this rest completely, and you, who have seen everything this place has shown you, who have stood at your station and held what was given to you to hold, who have noticed the things the brief does not ask you to notice, and carried them quietly in the pockets that invisible people have, who have learned the smell of this place in all its layers, the performance and the truth beneath the performance, the musk and the drainage and the roses and the rain. You've earned this rest. You've earned all of it. Take it. The darkness behind your closed eyes is the darkness of genuine sleep, soft and final and complete, the darkness that opens like water when you enter it and closes behind you without a seam. Let it close. The palace will hold you the way it holds everything, in its stone, in its corridors, in its vast, patient architecture that has been standing for 100 years and will stand for 100 more, holding all the people who have moved through it and slept in it and woken in it and worked in it and sung to themselves in small quiet rooms when they believed no one was listening. You were listening. Good night.